Chapter 1. When Kryptonians Cross Over. Ethan slumped into his desk chair, the glow of his monitor painting his tired face. After a long day at the office, he'd always found comfort in DC's latest animated adventures, especially when Superman took to the skies with effortless grace. Tonight, he'd been watching Clark Kent deflect missiles with nothing but a raised hand, and a wistful sigh escaped him. "I wish I could feel what it's like to be a Kryptonian," he murmured, half to himself. No sooner had the words left his lips than darkness closed in around him. He blinked once, twice, and everything went black. When Ethan came to, he was lying on a cold metal bench. All around him were signs and advertisements written in English, bus schedules, shop names, street signs. A man waiting at the next bench gave him a startled look, then hurried off without a word. "Where am I?" Ethan sat up, rubbing his temples. His head was pounding, and a rush of jumbled thoughts swirled through his mind. Surreal scenes of flying above alien cities, heat vision blasting through steel walls, an overwhelming sense of power. "Oh my God," he whispered, voice trembling. "I really traveled through time?" He half expected some cosmic announcer to pop in and explain. "If you're granting wishes," he called into the silent air, "could I at least get the deluxe package?" Silence answered him. Whoever, or whatever, had wrenched him from his apartment was already gone. Ethan closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded to himself. "Fine," he said, standing and brushing off his jeans. "Let's see what this new world has in store." Ethan blinked against the morning sunlight, turning in his seat as if waking from a dream. Of all the impossible things that had happened to him, of suddenly gaining Kryptonian powers, it was this that puzzled him most. Was he more like the big-screen Superman, or the one from the comic books? He still didn't know, and for now it hardly mattered. What did matter was figuring out where he was. He pushed himself to his feet and scanned the street. English signs and billboards loomed over cafes and shops. Captain America, Nostalgia Project, now playing. Jackson stars in the role of the Sentinel of Liberty. Scandal, Tony Stark spotted leaving cover model's suite last night. The sun warmed his face, and with it came a sudden clarity. Years of half-forgotten English lessons flooded back into his mind. He read the headlines again and smiled wryly. Captain America Nostalgia? Tony Stark's romantic escapade? His new world was none other than the Marvel Universe. He'd always wanted an easier life, somewhere peaceful, predictable. Instead, this place came with a constant rush of adrenaline. Already, sounds and images flooded his senses. A couple shouting at each other nearly a kilometer away. Through walls, the horrifying echo of a murder in an apartment half a mile off. Ethan clenched his fists, letting his enhanced hearing and vision settle as best they could. This was just the beginning. Ethan's head felt as if it might split apart under the onslaught of sights, sounds, and data flooding into his brain. Then, just as suddenly, his mind kicked into overdrive, filtering out the noise, parsing every detail with ruthless efficiency. Super hearing, super vision, a supercharged intellect. He realized what had happened. Under this world's yellow sun, he'd unlocked the legendary abilities of a Kryptonian. A rush of relief swept over him. He'd feared he might never adapt to this planet's climate, but now every neuron blazed with new power. Memories, facts, even distant fragments of books he'd read, all were instantly at his fingertips. Ethan barely registered the pain in his hands until he saw the 2 deep grooves he'd unconsciously carved into the concrete floor. Those marks would draw attention. Best to leave, immediately. He scanned the area. No cameras in sight. Good. In a heartbeat, he propelled himself forward, a blur of motion streaking away from the room. As he ran, a single question hammered in his mind. What force had granted him these abilities, and what did it intend for him? Where to next? Ethan slowed to a jog, grappling with both his newfound powers and the mystery behind them. One thing was certain, his life had just changed forever, and he wasn't about to stand still and wait for answers. Ethan stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror. It was still his own face, unchanged, unmistakably human. So this really was just a flesh-and-blood body. Great, no papers, no ID, and as a Chinese man in this city, blending in would be a nightmare. He needed help. And fast. Puff! Startled, a burly thug in the dim alleyway collapsed, foam gathering at his mouth. Unfazed, Ethan knelt next to him and quietly emptied his pockets. These small-time street dealers often carried real cash, far more than the typical urchin begging for spare change. A few quick scans confirmed he'd snagged several thick wads of bills, probably a few $1,000s in all. Before anyone could recognize him, Ethan tapped into his super speed. In an instant, he slipped on a pair of sunglasses, ran a hand through his hair to alter his silhouette, and faded out of sight. Around here, to the old guard, all Asians looked alike anyway, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese. It didn't matter. As long as he wasn't seen as the same person twice, he was safe. With the thug neutralized and the cash in hand, Ethan slipped away from the alley. His next destination, the city library. There, he would set about forging an identity, his first real step toward surviving in this strange, new world. Ethan relished the freedom of blending in, doing whatever he pleased, yet he preferred to stay hidden, especially with two powerful adversaries on his trail, the Sorcerer Supreme, the Ancient One, and Captain Marvel. To become a true hacker, he knew he first needed a firm grasp of fundamental computer science. The public library, with its rows of technical manuals and internet terminals, was the ideal classroom. Conveniently, he'd acquired a laptop from an oblivious mugger's backpack with such speed and precision that nobody even noticed. He began by reviewing essential commands, the old DOS prompt on Windows, various shells in Unix and Linux. With his enhanced intellect, concepts that might stump others clicked into place in minutes. Next, he moved on to server configuration, installing and tuning a Windows environment, setting up IIS, and deploying ASP, PHP, and JSP applications. From there, he dove straight into advanced techniques, Google hacking with specialized search queries, cookie manipulation, phishing frameworks, social engineering tactics, you name it. In less than an hour, Ethan had absorbed more than most would in months: digital signatures, programming methodologies, even the offensive habits of seasoned pen testers. By the time he finished, even FBI-grade firewalls and network defenses seemed like child's play. Slipping into a secluded corner of the library, Ethan connected to his stolen laptop and cracked his knuckles. His journey into the underworld of hacking had only just begun, but already he was leagues ahead of anyone who might stand in his way. Ethan stared at his battered laptop screen, the glow illuminating the cramped confines of his makeshift workbench. He'd underestimated his first target, the Pentagon. Using nothing more than a second-hand notebook computer, he tried to breach several major U.S. intelligence agencies. It was common knowledge that these organizations fended off waves of hackers every day. His initial attempt failed spectacularly. One wrong move almost exposed him completely. In a brief, humiliating exchange, the agency's cyber team slipped past his rudimentary defenses, studied his code, and quickly turned the tables, nearly trapping him in his own digital snare. But by dissecting their methods, Ethan found the gaps in their approach and counterattacked in seconds, erasing every trace of his intrusion. "The Rising Tide organization," he muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard as he dug deeper. Rumors said their lead hacker, Sky, the so-called shockwave map girl, possessed skills that defied belief. With that same thrift store laptop in hand, she'd reportedly dismantled Tony Stark's advanced shield firewall without breaking a sweat. Now that Ethan had some experience under his belt, he could reverse engineer most hacks, but Sky's work was on another level entirely. To make matters worse, the Rising Tide had no static server, no fixed IP, nothing tangible to track. They vanished into the ether until they chose to reveal themselves. Frustrated, Ethan shifted tactics. He scrubbed his online footprint, established a false identity, and pivoted to an easier mark, the banks. Leveraging the same techniques he'd refined against the intelligence agencies, he infiltrated several large financial institutions and siphoned off funds from dormant anonymous accounts. It wasn't the Pentagon, but it was enough to keep him alive and well-funded until he could crack the Rising Tide's secrets. Ultimately, Ethan was revealed to be the illegitimate son of a powerful corporation in a remote, unnamed country. Once he inherited a substantial fortune, he set off for America. Chapter 2. Knowing Yourself. Ethan, as a foreigner, had little interest in chasing an American green card or naturalization. Instead, he treated his unexpected inheritance as seed money, pouring it into the stock market and openly testing his luck in Las Vegas. As his winnings mounted into the hundreds of millions, one question kept nagging at him. If Clark Kent shared his superintelligence, Why was the young reporter living so hand-to-mouth? Kent's adoptive parents were scrambling to save their farm from foreclosure. The bank was days away from seizing their home until Batman quietly bailed them out. Ethan didn't want to flaunt any superpowers of his own, but a little display of pure brainpower seemed harmless. After all, he'd turned a modest multi-million-dollar bankroll into more than $1 billion in casino winnings just by calculating odds and counting cards. Far from resenting his luck, the casinos treated Ethan like a prized asset. They assigned him a team of bodyguards at every table and booked him into the city's most secure luxury hotel. To them, his staggering wins were the best advertisement imaginable. Word of mouth among high rollers would draw in newer, wealthier players whose losses would more than cover Ethan's jackpot, and then some. As he settled back into his guarded suite, Ethan realized that in this city, the sharpest mind could be as valuable as any superpower. Arranging for bodyguards proved almost too simple. It was competitors he feared, rivals eager to stir up trouble and implicate his casino in some manufactured scandal. The reality left Ethan oddly deflated. He'd pictured cloak-and-dagger intrigue, not this tedious paranoia. Still, he put his billion-dollar windfall to work on Wall Street, knowing that regulators and the FBI watched closely for any hint of insider trading. He approached the market like a scientist, meticulously poring over financial statements, earnings reports, and trend analyses before placing a single trade. That discipline turned $1 billion into $2.5 billion in just a few months. Rather than chase ever riskier bets, Ethan channeled his gains into founding a biotech company dedicated to genetic research. He'd accepted that Kryptonians would acclimate to the Marvel Universe without issue. What kept him awake at night was the possibility of microscopic or even molecular complications that could escape conventional study. Now, with more resources than he'd ever imagined, Ethan was determined to uncover and neutralize the smallest threats before they ever had a chance to manifest. Ethan couldn't shake the thought. Had that mysterious presence somehow seeded in him the idea of a universal Kryptonian for the Marvel Universe? If not, he was dead set on ensuring he wouldn't vanish without a trace. With that resolve, he funneled $2 billion into creating a new enterprise, Monarch, its name a deliberate homage to the enigmatic Monarch organization from the Godzilla films. His very first order of business was to assemble the brightest minds in genetic research. Ethan offered top scientists leadership roles or the chance to mentor him directly, and they eagerly agreed. Under their guidance, he absorbed the fundamentals of molecular biology and gene editing at a staggering clip. After all, there was already talk of Tony Stark mastering thermonuclear astrophysics in a single night, so why shouldn't he eclipse conventional limits within weeks? Professor Landa, thank you for your guidance, Ethan said with a warm smile, shaking the elderly scientist's hand. 1 month in, he'd distilled every major concept in genetics into an integrated framework. On paper, he was poised to become a world-class researcher. Yet despite mastering the facts and figures, Ethan realized he still lacked the true mindset of a scientist, the intuitive ways of thinking and problem-solving that separate good researchers from the great. Ethan leaned back in his lab chair, staring at the rows of data streaming across the hollow display. For all Monarch Corporation's efforts, the embargo on American bioinstrumentation still held firm. No matter how many pleas they made, the top-tier microscopes and gene sequencers stayed locked behind U.S. export controls. But that limitation didn't faze him. He was one living super instrument. His vision alone rivaled the most powerful electron microscopes, picking out subcellular structures at will. His brain, a mesh of neural enhancements and quantum processors, performed analysis at speeds no human supercomputer could match. The only real challenge had been harvesting his own cells without destroying them in the process. Over the last year, Ethan had perfected a surgical nanotech extraction, tiny biodrones circulating through his bloodstream, sampling cells, then returning to dock with the central lab unit. Meanwhile, his awakened iron body and bioforce field kept his physical defenses at their absolute maximum. After weeks of controlled sun exposure, he still couldn't guarantee survival against a nuclear blast, but he was certain that even the most advanced missiles would bounce harmlessly off his shield. With a reliable sampling method in hand, Ethan sealed himself in a shielded chamber and began the slow, meticulous work of irradiating each cell sample with calibrated bursts of UV and simulated solar spectra. He tracked every reaction: DNA strand breaks, protein crosslinks, repair enzyme activity, logging terabytes of data every day. 12 months later, the results were in. Ethan tapped a sequence of commands on his wrist console, and 3 lines of status reports blinked up in green. Sample 115 viable, sample 191 viable, sample 239 viable. He set down the console and exhaled, relief washing through him. At last, he understood precisely how his cells absorbed, repaired, and even thrived under solar radiation. Now, with that knowledge, nothing, not sanctions, not missiles, could hold him back. For the past year, Ethan and his team subjected a range of specimens to sunlight under varying durations, environments, and intensities. In every trial, the samples not only survived but showed no negative effects. Kryptonian cells are remarkably active. So long as they receive solar energy, they continue to function without deterioration. After his own long absence from direct sunlight, Ethan stepped outside and stretched, savoring the warmth of the rays. During that same year, construction on the Emperor building, the centerpiece of Ethan's enterprise, reached completion. With a total cost of $500 million, this tower was designed for maximum defense. Its core is a reinforced steel skeleton fully encased in concrete, sitting atop an alloy-reinforced foundation. In terms of durability, it even outclasses the proposed Stark building, which is budgeted at $600 million. Despite its impressive specs, the Emperor Company has been running at a loss ever since groundbreaking. After all, Ethan has remained sequestered in his private laboratory throughout the project, and no one outside knows exactly what he's been developing. Chapter 3. The action begins. Ethan couldn't have cared less about what his competitors were up to. He'd already set his own course: dominate the booming field of human body enhancement. He knew he'd be up against heavy hitters: Osborne Enterprises, General Ross's military super soldier program, and Killian Industries with its extremist virus research. But none of that fazed him. Osborne Enterprises had been chasing breakthroughs for years, but never produced anything viable. Worse, the Parkers had destroyed every last scrap of data on the spider serum before disappearing into the night, and the lingering threat of the Green Goblin serum still hung over their labs. General Ross, convinced that capturing more Hulks was the answer to every problem, threw the full weight of the military into super soldier development. Yet despite countless trials, true success remained elusive. And while Killian Industries had pioneered the extremist virus, it was still plagued by uncontrollable side effects and dangerous instability. It was a massive market hungry for any real advancement. All Ethan needed was a way to secure his own technology and keep rivals from stealing his edge. He'd make sure that anyone who dared cross him would regret it, permanently. With that in mind, he turned back to his lab, already sketching out the next phase of his master plan. The real game, he knew, was only just beginning. This really is a high-stakes corporate battle, and the wild card here is that he's an outsider with what amounts to unlimited market share. If he can't make it in the US, he can simply shift his operation elsewhere. You argue that America is the world's freest, most transparent nation, safeguarded by private property rights and a written constitution. So how could something like this even happen? The answer, as always, is that when massive profits are on the line, those legal protections quickly become playthings for wealthy industrialists and plutocrats. Once those obstacles were cleared, the floodgates would open. Contracts from the U.S. Department of Defense would pour in. After all, senior figures in the military are more than intrigued by cutting-edge biotech, especially anything that promises human enhancement. Ethan rubbed his temples. "This is giving me a headache," he muttered, "but I can handle it." He glanced down at the book in his lap, Introduction to Hypnosis Techniques. 10 minutes later, he set it aside and turned his attention to online research. By the 30-minute mark, Ethan was already dialing his contacts in the Pentagon, initiating discussions with top brass about the potential applications of his technology. Ethan's so-called connection wasn't magic or insider her contacts at all. It was pure hacking. He'd used his skills to pull down sensitive profiles of high-ranking officers, then zeroed in on a man whose rank matched Thunderbolt General Ross's. An hour later, he'd slipped into that general's home and come face to face with him. "Who are you?" demanded General Kelson D. Shiwade, staring at the stranger on his own sofa. The man wore a long black trench coat, slicked back hair, and dark sunglasses, and, uncomfortably, a pistol lay casually at his side. "Please have a seat, General Shiwate." Ethan offered a polite nod, his tone calm and measured. Shiwate hesitated, then eased onto the opposite end of the couch, every bit the disciplined soldier. He sat with his back straight, eyes never leaving Ethan's. His face was lined with experience, hardened, watchful, like a man who's seen too many things go wrong. Yet there was no rage in his expression, only the quiet toughness of someone who's long since learned to contain his anger. Ethan leaned forward, resting his hands on his knees. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "You're wondering how I got in here without setting off a single alarm. Consider it a demonstration of my capabilities." Shiwade's gaze sharpened. "You broke into my home. You had every chance to kill me." He weighed his words carefully, measuring Ethan's reaction. Ethan let out a low chuckle. "Killing you wouldn't have served my purpose. I needed your cooperation, voluntary cooperation. I want an audience with Thunderbolt General Ross." Shiwate frowned. "He's not exactly easy to reach." "That's where you come in." Ethan smiled slightly. "You make the introduction, and I guarantee you'll want to hear what I have to say, or we can see how well your guards handle you, though I suspect that won't be necessary." The general studied him for a long moment, then closed his eyes briefly, as if weighing an invisible scale. Finally, he opened them and nodded once. "All right, Miss Ethan, just Ethan." Shiwade arose, every inch the soldier he was. "Follow me. But any tricks?" "No tricks," Ethan promised. He stood up, squared his shoulders, and followed the general out of the room. In that instant, an uneasy alliance was forged, one built on equal parts necessity and mutual caution. Ethan studied the general's calm, unflinching stare, and wasn't surprised by it. Shiwate was a seasoned officer, the sort who'd met every threat with steel nerve. Ethan offered a reassuring smile as he stepped forward. "General Shiwate," he said, voice low and steady, "I've come bearing an opportunity for you. There's no cause for alarm." Unbeknownst to Shiwate, Ethan's true purpose was already in motion. With every carefully chosen word and measured gesture, he wove a hypnotic suggestion around the older man's mind. In the Marvel universe, Hydra operatives could bend even a fully trained S-Shield agent to their will with a mere activation of a ring. Ethan, however, possessed Kryptonian gifts that made his method infinitely more potent and infinitely more dangerous. "General," Ethan continued, his tone melding authority and reassurance, "I need you to help me reach out to a few of your fellow commanders. Their cooperation will be crucial." He paused, letting the words sink in. Shiwate's posture slackened, the tension draining from his shoulders as the hypnosis took hold. Shiwate's eyes flickered once, then he inclined his head. "Understood," he murmured, voice soft and compliant. "Who should I contact first?" A faint, satisfied smile curved Ethan's lips. With Shiwate under his influence, the next phase of his plan would unfold without a hitch. Once he'd secured the loyalty of the other generals in turn, the entire military hierarchy would bend to his will. It was the perfect solution, silent, swift, and unstoppable. As a result, Ethan successfully convinced several generals at the Ministry of National Defense to purchase his Imperial Company's flagship product, codenamed Super Soldier No. 1, under the guise of an official arms sale. Unlike serums derived from Kryptonian cells, Super Soldier No. 1 springs entirely from Ethan's own cellular research. When administered, it doubles the user's physical strength while accelerating metabolism and optimizing every bodily function. Though doubling might sound modest, for an ordinary person it translates into near superhuman prowess, on par with Captain America or the Winter Soldier. Naturally, the military brass was ecstatic at the prospect of fielding troops with such capabilities. But Ethan had been equally clear about one thing. Manufacturing each dose is staggeringly expensive, and the price tag reflects the cutting-edge science and rare resources behind Super Soldier No. 1. Chapter 4. Be My Running Dog. After the Defense Ministry and the U.S. military witnessed the effects of Super Soldier Compound No. 1, they moved swiftly to lock in their supply. They signed a 50-year contract with Imperial Company. Every single drop of the compound the company produced over the next half-century would be reserved for military use. In effect, the Pentagon bought out Imperial's entire 50-year output, and the price was staggering. Ethan confidently set it at $10 million per vial. When military officials protested, he coolly reminded them that Compound Number 1 also delays cellular aging, allowing enhanced soldiers to remain combat-ready far longer than any standard operative. That promise of extended service sealed the deal. Objections vanished, and the Pentagon began pressing him to accelerate production. Still, Ethan wasn't prepared to become anyone's hired gun. No matter how lucrative the contract, he refused to relinquish total control of his creation. Other corporations might have leapt at such an offer, but Imperial Company would never be a mere extension of the Defense Department, and no government would dictate the fate of his breakthrough. Ethan stared down at the latest intelligence briefing with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. Osborne Industries, thanks to a parallel government contract, enjoyed virtually unlimited funding. Without it, they might not even be a tenth of their current size. Yet here he was, determined to open the world market, and no one, not even Osborne, could match his share. So why on earth should he submit to an American buyout? When Ethan refused the offer and insisted that Compound Number 1 belonged to everyone, not just the United States, the military liaisons, none of whom answered to him, erupted in indignation. "You're doing business on American soil," they barked. "You must obey U.S. law," as if any global enterprise could escape Washington's long arm. This, Ethan realized, was the superpower's favorite way of neutralizing foreign competition. Bully them until they cave. Who were they to threaten him? He used to swallow this kind of indignity when he was just another researcher, powerless and overlooked. But that was before the accident, before he discovered his Kryptonian heritage. Here, in this world without Kryptonite, Superman, or Batman, that legacy meant nothing. Even the Ancient One, Sorcerer Supreme, barely acknowledged his existence. So once again, he forced down his rage, tightened his jaw, and faced them with polite defiance. If a Kryptonian can be silenced, can he even call himself one? Perhaps, but not today. Today, Ethan would fight back. Ethan leaned back in his chair and spoke with casual confidence. "I'm planning to open a branch of Emperor Company in Vodka Ula," he said, "and I've even been scouting land in Asia for a second site." He flashed a wry smile. "So if anyone's waiting in the shadows to assassinate me, they're going to be disappointed." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a half-dozen men in black, shirts, pants, boots, emerged from the gloom and attacked. They moved quickly, but Ethan moved faster. In less than a minute, every one of them was lying unconscious at his feet. Ethan regarded their sprawled forms with a mix of amusement and irritation. "You really don't know how to live or die, do you?" he muttered, crouching to check a pulse. "You thought you could take me out?" He rifled through the nearest assailant's pockets. No data drives, no coded memory chips. That, Ethan reminded himself, was precisely how he wanted it. Emperor Company's most sensitive technical blueprints and research notes weren't stored on any server. He committed every detail to memory. In the Marvel Universe, even the trickiest firewalls could be breached by a hacker like Sky, or by lesser cyberpunk opportunists. The only truly safe place for his secrets was inside his own mind. And anyway, could anyone really pry information from a Kryptonian's thoughts? All of Ethan's stolen cells had been consumed and digested, nothing left behind. If the military or the Ministry of Defense decided to drag Emperor Company employees into their investigations, they'd find no trail to follow. Frankly, that suited Ethan just fine. He stood, dusted off his hands, and walked away from the unconscious would-be assassins, already planning his next move. Ethan set his sights immediately on Vodka Country and then Asia, determined to establish a branch there, and eventually transform it into his new headquarters. Whoever had dispatched those armed professionals clearly believed that a lone scientist posed no real threat. They were in for a rude awakening. When the mercenaries burst in, weapons drawn, they expected to overwhelm him with sheer force. Instead, they found themselves staring down the barrel of defeat. In moments, Ethan had disarmed and incapacitated every one of them. Far from merely knocking them unconscious, he placed them under hypnosis, gently probing for the names of their employers and the true masterminds pulling the strings. Once he extracted the information, Ethan faced a choice: eliminate them or recruit them. The decision was easy. He needed specialists, trained operatives who understood covert operations. Rather than destroy his captives, he carefully unspooled his hypnotic conditioning, rewiring their loyalties so that they would serve him without question. This was only the first strike. Intelligence agencies and shadowy organizations would not abandon such a lucrative prize so easily. Compound Number 1 held immeasurable power and promised untold rewards. More attempts on Ethan's life and freedom were inevitable, but he welcomed each challenge. With every enemy he transformed into an ally, his network grew stronger. Turning adversaries into friends wasn't just a side effect of his abilities, it was his greatest pleasure and his most potent weapon. "Why do you have to be so extreme? Why not just be my errand boy?" the newcomer snapped. "These big players rarely show their faces to the public, but you, Ethan, can track them down wherever they hide, bend them to your will, and claim their power for yourself. Isn't that a win-win?" The man on his knees in front of Ethan shuddered. "I only wanted to do business. Why are you twisting my arm like this?" Ethan offered a small, amused smile. He crouched so that his steel-gray eyes were level with the other man's. "Prove your loyalty." With that, Ethan beckoned, palm up. "Good dog, come here." The man whimpered, scrambled forward on all fours, and collapsed at Ethan's feet. Ethan dropped a massive bone in front of him. Blood trickled from the man's split lips and broken teeth, but he seized the bone with a desperate growl. He bit down, splintering the marrow, and chewed ravenously, like a starving animal clinging to its last scrap of hope. Chapter 5, From 2 billion to 50 billion. After Ethan repelled one attack after another and exposed the shadowy figures pulling the strings, the turmoil finally subsided. With his adversaries neutralized, Emperor Corporation emerged not just unscathed, but transformed, poised to dominate its field. To outside observers, the company's composed exterior suggested that the onslaught had left no mark. Yet anyone versed in corporate warfare knows that true strength lies in calm resolve, not in panic. Whispers circulated that Emperor Corporation had quietly forged partnerships with vodka and other geopolitically sensitive nations to accelerate development of the super soldier Compound Number 1. Even more astonishing, Washington had apparently looked the other way. Those in the know understood immediately. This was no ordinary biotech venture. When the Department of Defense formally contracted Emperor Corporation, it signaled that the company wielded real political influence. Speculation ran rampant over which party in Washington backed the enterprise, elephant or donkey. America's two great political factions have always vied for supremacy. Officially, the elephants hold the majority, but true power often resides in the shadows, where allegiances shift like desert sands. Whoever pulled the strings, it was clear that Emperor Corporation was playing in Washington's deepest corridors of power. Financially, the leap was as dramatic as it was undeniable. What began as a $2 billion investment had swelled to a valuation of $50 billion almost overnight. Emperor Corporation was no longer a promising upstart. It was the new titan on the global stage, one with the resources, the connections, and the political clout to reshape the rules of the game. Ethan strolled through the sleek hallways of Emperor Company's headquarters, his mind drifting to the current political landscape. The president, vice president, and a handful of top military officials all answered to the ruling Elephant Party. Opposing them stood the Donkey Party's majority. At first glance, it seemed the Elephant Party dominated. But Ethan knew better. Real power always rested with the hidden backers pulling the strings on both sides. As a time traveler and Kryptonian, he had no interest in their turf wars. Which faction held sway made no difference to him. Back at the office, that indifference stood in stark contrast to everyone else's excitement. Word of the Super Soldier Compound Number 1 breakthrough had spread like wildfire. Within days, Emperor Company's boardroom teemed with potential investors, venture capitalists, hedge funds, even representatives from rival corporations, all eager to secure a stake. Some pressed for an immediate public offering. Despite its years of red ink, the company had just reported its first profitable quarter thanks to the compound's promise. Yet the board politely declined every pitch. No outside funding, no IPO, at least for now. They preferred to grow on their own terms. When employees heard the news, the atmosphere shifted overnight. Where there had been doubt and frustration during lean times, a renewed confidence now took hold. Everyone sensed they were on the cusp of something big, and for the first time in a long time, they believed in their own future. Ethan leaned back in his chair and marveled at how far Emperor Company had come. Not long ago, its hiring bar was unremarkable. Any Ivy League graduate could walk through the doors. Today, it was a corporate behemoth, holding an iron grip on its single most valuable product. After all, what's more profitable than a monopoly? And with no antitrust suits in sight, they were simply printing money. Then came the U.S. government's billion-dollar order. $1 billion sounded impressive, but Ethan knew Emperor Company had already poured twice that amount into research and development, so this sale barely covered half their costs. He wasn't surprised to hear Washington wouldn't stop there. Before long, they'd buy another batch of Super Soldier Compound No. 1, funneling it through major contractors, so they could study its potential. The profit margin might shrink, but the prestige and leverage would be worth it. Yet all of that mattered less to Ethan than the national spotlight Emperor Company had ignited. Their relentless advertising campaign had the entire country buzzing. Everywhere he looked, online forums, TV news segments, even late-night talk shows, people were debating the ethics and implications of creating super soldiers. From the Pentagon down to every major network, the conversation circled back to one place, the Triskelion building, the new face of American power and the epicenter of this brewing revolution. At the headquarters of the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency, the air was thick with summer heat. Director Ethan Fury, a one-eyed, dark-skinned man wrapped in a heavy black leather trench coat, stood over the video feed, his expression darkening by the second. On the screen, Emperor Corporation's slick promotional reel boasted its latest miracle. Biocompound No. 1, the pinnacle of human evolution, instantly doubles your strength, shatters world records. Breaking human limits is no longer a dream. A new slide followed. Biocompound No. 1, anti-aging formula, preserve your youth forever. Ethan's jaw clenched. Emperor Corporation had been founded a year ago, hired top biologists, and then vanished. No news, no breakthroughs, nothing. Now, without warning, they claimed to have unlocked superhuman abilities for everyone. If they were telling the truth, the global balance of power would collapse overnight. Armies and weapon systems calibrated for ordinary humans would be useless against a world of enhanced individuals. To stay in control, every nation would have no choice but to rush into its own weapon upgrade race, triggering a new era of geopolitical escalation. Fury closed his eyes for a moment, bracing himself. This announcement wasn't just a scientific milestone. It was the spark that could ignite global chaos. More importantly, the established powers will almost certainly exercise restraint. No one with the ability to raise the planet wants to press that button. The real question is what happens when smaller nations get their hands on super soldiers. If a regional skirmish can be escalated by superhuman operatives, if local disputes turn into wide-scale carnage, are these still super soldiers, or simply weapons of mass destruction? Nick Fury's jaw tightened as he reviewed the latest intelligence. He'd known firms like Osborne Industries were experimenting with human enhancement, but he'd always assumed such programs would remain prohibitively expensive and tightly controlled. After all, there'd only ever been one Captain America since World War II, proof that this technology wasn't exactly for sale. Yet here it was. For $10 million, any client with enough cash could buy a squadron of super soldiers. The price didn't alarm him as much as Monarch's sheer recklessness. This small, virtually unknown outfit not only cracked the code, they sold it to the highest bidder without asking questions. Terrorist cells, warlords, criminal syndicates, anyone with a wallet could transform ordinary soldiers into unstoppable juggernauts. Monarch's brazenness led Fury to a disturbing conclusion. The super soldier breakthrough must have originated in the United States, after all. Chapter 6. Nick Fury. To the rest of the world, the Imperial Company is nothing more than a private firm founded by the United States to keep its activities under wraps. Nick Fury, however, knows better. As a level 10 agent, he's seen his share of moral ambiguity. There's no way someone at his level stays spotless. But arms trafficking is a line even he can't ignore. Yet much of the illicit trade in small arms shipments slips under his radar. It simply isn't worth the effort. Fury reserves his firepower for contraband of strategic significance. Smuggled goods tied to Stark Industries would have him chasing leads across every continent. Ethan, anticipating this scrutiny, got ahead of the game. He labeled Super Soldier Compound Number 1 not as a weapon, but as a health supplement. By registering it through pharmaceutical channels, he exploited a gaping loophole. Health products fall outside Fury's jurisdiction. The U.S. medical regulation system is notoriously complex, impenetrable even, and most outsiders can't hope to tamper with it. Because Ethan's classification cleared legal review, Fury finds himself powerless to intervene. Watching the situation unfold, Fury can't help but draw a comparison to other American money-making schemes, arming proxy militias, covertly supporting insurgencies, and sending CIA operatives in to stoke regional conflicts. War is big business, after all. In his view, the Imperial Company's new health product is just another way for Washington to profit from global instability. And Nick Fury, reluctant enforcer of laws that bend beneath the weight of classified loopholes, won't let it go unremarked. Ethan stared at the projection on the wall and shook his head. "I never imagined they'd turn this into a human enhancement technology," he muttered. "They really don't see the danger." His secretary, Michelle, an unblemished British talent and top graduate in financial management, nodded in agreement. "Nick Fury's already preparing to warn Washington," she reported. "He'll insist that no mass-produced enhancement tech reaches the open market. He figures the big five powers can handle anything extra. After all, they already possess the world's most lethal deterrents, but allowing smaller states to acquire it would plunge us into endless conflicts." Ethan tapped his pen against the table. "Fury's right. If this tech spreads, we're looking at a new arms race, constant skirmishes, proxy wars everywhere. We can't let Imperial Company's work get hijacked like that." Michelle's tablet chimed, and she swiped the screen. "On the bright side, sir, based on our latest growth and sales figures, Imperial Company's valuation has just topped $50 billion. A wry smile tugged at Ethan's lips. "That's impressive," he said, "but let's make sure our profits don't compromise global security." Ethan studied the intricate formulas displayed on the screen, sparing Michelle the trouble of translating each one. "Emperor Corporation will not engage in any securities transactions," he announced in his usual calm. With that declaration, assigning a valuation became pointless. Ethan had no intention of issuing shares or selling stock, so the question of price simply didn't matter to him. Michelle forced a polite nod. "Understood, boss," she said, though her eyes betrayed her confusion. Why would he refuse outside investment? Bringing in capital could speed up Imperial Company's expansion, and if she was honest, Michelle secretly hoped for a chance to grab a stake in the business herself. Everyone knew Emperor Corporation's immense, almost inscrutable backing and its tight grip on the market. It was the kind of enterprise that practically guaranteed profit, much like investing in Stark Industries at its peak. Had she been granted stock options before an eventual IPO, she might have seen share prices climb and enjoyed steady dividend payments afterward. According to Michelle's calculations, if the company issued 1 million shares in an IPO, each share would easily fetch $1,000. That kind of valuation would mean a windfall for the owners, but going public also means submitting to a host of regulatory requirements and opening the entire business to public scrutiny. If the CEO ever ordered something illegal or non-compliant, employees would have both the right and the legal protection to report him. He couldn't hide behind corporate procedure to silence them. And then there was Ethan himself, a genuine prodigy and undeniably handsome. He was nothing like the Chinese classmates Michelle remembered from school. His distinction showed not only in his scholarly interests and refined manners, but even more in the unshakable confidence he carried after unlocking his Kryptonian abilities. There was a quiet power in everything he did, a sense of authority that radiated from within. Among ordinary men, he was striking. Among the extraordinary, he was unforgettable. Thanks to a year of subtle enhancements by the Kryptonians, his looks had been refined to a level that most would simply call legendary. Michelle had encountered her share of beautiful women, polished gentlemen, and athletic sports stars, but never anyone like Ethan. The men she'd known before seemed pale in comparison, and despite herself, she felt a spark of attraction. Ethan, however, appeared only mildly interested in her. "We've fulfilled the U.S. government's billion-dollar order, 100 vials of Super Soldier Compound Number 1, Michelle said, tapping her tablet. "More contracts are coming in, sir. We'll need to expand production." Ethan nodded, his calm gaze fixed on the data. In his secret underground lab, he'd already placed several scientists under hypnosis, instructing them to work day and night to synthesize the compound exactly to his specifications. "Production will ramp up immediately," he replied. "The investment contracts are nearly ready. Anyone who wants in should act now. There's serious money to be made." "It looks like the chapter text didn't come through. Could you please paste the full passage you'd like me to revise?" "Once I have the complete text, I'll transform it into a polished, idiomatic English version with your requested changes, renaming Luther to Ethan, ensuring he's male, etc." Chapter 7. Ordinary Kryptonians Have Their Limits. Ethan's decision to found a company hinged on one simple product, Super Soldier Compound Number 1. Of course, he stood to make a fortune selling human enhancement serums, but there was a more urgent motive. He needed a plausible cover for his own superhuman abilities. In this version of the Marvel world, DC Comics existed only as printed entertainment, not a parallel universe. Still, that didn't stop people from noticing that Ethan's powers were eerily similar to Superman's. Rumors of a secret Kryptonian circulated whenever he flew faster than a speeding bullet or shrugged off a direct hit. Although this reality contained no kryptonite, it was steeped in magic. And who could say there wasn't a red sun somewhere out there? Even if no alien star happened to bathe Earth in crimson light, geniuses like Tony Stark or Reed Richards would surely try to recreate the effect in the lab, analyze the spectrum, and inject themselves for super strength. Ethan couldn't risk becoming their next pet project. So he hit them with a decoy. He poured his resources into developing a line of human enhancement formulas, publicly hyped as cutting-edge breakthroughs. In truth, the vials he sold to eager customers would contain nothing more than outdated, inferior compounds. Meanwhile, his own serum, the one that truly amplified his Kryptonian-level physiology, would remain his closest secret. That way, Ethan could rake in profits, deflect scientific scrutiny, and keep the world focused on his miracle supplements rather than the real source of his extraordinary power. This is standard practice for American corporations, and one the U.S. government and its agencies have become entirely accustomed to. Nearly every advanced technology and high-end product in this country comes from profit-driven firms like Boeing or General Electric. Spurred on by the promise of vast returns, these companies pour enormous resources into research and development. Yet, curiously, they almost never offer their very best innovations for domestic sale. The reasoning is simple. If they release their top-tier technology right away, then all the earlier prototypes, the flawed models, the beta designs, would instantly lose their value. To a capitalist committed to maximizing profit, that scenario is unthinkable. Every step of the development process represents a potential revenue stream, so no company is going to give away the most advanced version for free. What they do instead is package those older second or even third-generation models in eye-catching branding, attach a fresh marketing concept, and set optimistic expectations. Then they sell these new products at premium prices, squeezing every last drop of profit from technology that, behind the polished exterior, is already obsolete. In effect, they're selling yesterday's innovations while quietly working on tomorrow's breakthroughs, and ensuring they profit from both. Ethan knew that, no matter how impressive his latest demonstration was, it would only fuel people's jealousy and suspicions. In the Marvel Universe, mutants are those whose powers suddenly awaken, or people altered by super soldier experiments, like many of the villains, and they usually manifest only one, maybe two abilities. But Ethan's powers went far beyond that. Heat vision, super strength, freeze breath, supersonic speed, impenetrable defense, and flight. It simply didn't match the usual mutation profile, or any known alien physiology for that matter. Rumor would have it that he was some obsessive fan, someone who'd reverse-engineered every aspect of Superman's arsenal and rigged himself up with cutting-edge tech. That explanation suited everyone just fine. It painted Ethan as an eccentric billionaire at best, a mad inventor at worst. And for now, that misconception was exactly what he wanted. He tapped a few keys on the sleek console in front of him, and a holographic dossier popped into view. A soft chime announced the latest update. Tony Stark has placed an order with us. Ethan's brow furrowed in thought as he studied the terms. Stark's interest was never casual, and whatever Stark was planning, Ethan knew he'd have to be ready. Ethan had recently thrown himself into programming, determined to build an AI companion, much like Jarvis, to manage Emperor Company's operations. He wasn't looking to steal Stark's actual source code. In fact, he suspected Tony Stark might try to exploit any hidden backdoor or vulnerability to pry into his work. Meanwhile, Stark was obsessed with Compound Number 1, the human enhancement serum that, to date, appeared entirely free of side effects. Under strict government supervision, a portion of the supply was reserved for laboratory research, while willing U.S. soldiers volunteered for injections under controlled conditions. In a dramatic public statement, Stark leveled accusations at Monarch, blasting them for selling Compound No. 1 to local militias in Afghanistan, and branded Ethan as a financier of America's enemies. Of course, Stark had no idea that Monarch's own advanced weapons had already been smuggled into the same war zone. Had he known, his self-righteous posturing might have been a little less vehement. Ethan, however, was ready for every angle of attack. He expected pressure from greedy capitalists eager for their share of the profits and from keyboard warriors claiming moral high ground. None of it fazed him. In his book, reputation was secondary. What mattered most was the bottom line. Ethan sat alone in the specially designed chamber he'd built, a room engineered to capture and intensify every scrap of sunlight. Reflective panels lined the walls and ceiling, focusing rays through a crystal-thin skylight so that no photon went to waste. He knew that ordinary Kryptonians hit a power ceiling. Once their cells were fully charged, there was nowhere left to grow. Still, Ethan refused to accept that limit. What if, instead of plateauing, his body could continue to evolve under relentless solar bombardment? If ordinary Kryptonians were bound by their genetic programming, he would become something more, something closer to the legendary Doomsday. And not the mindless nightmare the name implied, but a perfectly controlled force of nature. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth seep into his bones. Typical Kryptonians have their limits, he whispered to the silent chamber. I'm going to find a way to transcend them and forge myself into a Doomsday who never loses control. Chapter 8. New Superpowers. Ethan stared at the data scrolling across the holodisplay, his mind racing. Kryptonian DNA, he now understood, comes pre-programmed with a genetic lock. Any attempt to probe or manipulate those sequences triggers a self-defense mechanism, the spontaneous emergence of Doomsday, an engineered life form whose sole purpose is to annihilate anyone who dares study Kryptonian biology. Superfast adaptive evolution combined with near immortality, Doomsday is the ultimate guardian of those genes. We can't afford to let anyone reverse-engineer Superman, Ethan muttered. That's why Doomsday exists, to protect Kryptonians from exploitation. He'd heard rumors that Dr. Lyle Bald was working on Kryptonian clones. If Bald succeeded, the plot would thicken, but Ethan had no interest in recycling old comic book tropes. What he wanted was himself, to push past every barrier. If he could somehow harness Doomsday's accelerated evolutionary capacity, then no adversary, no matter how powerful or well-armed, would pose a threat. Of course, there was a catch. The D-creatures popping up in the lab weren't the primeval, invincible Doomsday of legend. They were mass-produced knockoffs, strong, lethal even, but still mortal. It would be a significant breakthrough if Ethan could glean the mechanism of their rapid adaptation without being overwhelmed by their brute force. Fortunately, thanks to the covert network he'd built, his hypnotic commands woven through key officers in both the military and the Ministry of Defense, Ethan now had unfettered access to the most advanced biotech at their disposal. High-resolution gene sequencers, next-generation bioreactors, cryogenic incubators, all at his beck and call. Still, Even with his enhanced intellect and supervision, he couldn't bypass the logistics. Cultivating and experimenting on Kryptonian cells demanded precise instrumentation, sterilization chambers to prevent contamination, nanofluidic channels for single-cell manipulation, laser spectrometers for in-situ analysis. Ethan laid out the blueprints on the table, ticking off each device in his mind. "This is just the beginning," he said, voice low with determination. "If I can crack the evolutionary code that makes Doomsday adapt, I'll make sure no one ever threatens Krypton's legacy or mine again." He activated the lab's security grid and settled in for the long night ahead. The path to a new superpower wouldn't be easy, but Ethan had never been one to shy away from a challenge. And this time, the fate of Kryptonian genetics, and perhaps the entire world, hung in the balance. Ethan had also secured a vast cache of priceless knowledge and technical schematics, artifacts originally sealed away as part of World War II's most secret black technology. These were blueprints for Kryptonian theoretical science, breakthroughs humanity had yet to achieve. Ethan sighed to himself. "If only I had access to a Kryptonian spacecraft, I wouldn't be starting from absolute zero. Who knows when I'll finally climb from 0 to 1. He threw himself into his work with single-minded intensity, forgetting to eat or sleep. Sunlight alone fueled his Kryptonian metabolism, so he simply sat by the window, letting the rays recharge him while he studied Kryptonian genetics and cellular biology around the clock. With the help of his enhanced intellect, he digested every bit of human genetic research in under an hour. Next came programming. By nightfall, he'd built his own artificial intelligence. "Megatron, what's the status on the latest samples?" he asked. The AI's voice was calm, almost clinical. "Boss, sample number 10,000 has exhibited a completely normal reaction, no anomalies detected." Ethan pressed his palm to his forehead. A normal reaction meant the entire experiment had failed. "Destroy every one of those samples," he ordered. "We'll start from scratch." He exhaled, frustration gnawing at him. Why was perfect normalcy a dead end? In his work, failure was any result that didn't defy the limits of human and Kryptonian science, and so the cycle began anew. Ethan lounged in the warm sunlight, basking in its energy. In his mind, there was no longer any value in ordinary Kryptonian cells. Only Doomsday cells fascinated him now. Megatron had followed Ethan's orders to the letter. Every trace of standard Kryptonian tissue had been neutralized and utterly destroyed. Normally, Kryptonian cells are nearly impossible to eliminate. Thanks to their legendary regenerative powers, a dead Kryptonian can simply stand in the sun and come back to life. But Ethan's power was absolute. If he chose, he could erase even the toughest Kryptonian cell from existence. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the solar energy flood through him. His cells hummed with renewed vigor, and then something unexpected happened. His brow furrowed as a new power stirred within him. It shouldn't have been surprising. Awakening every ability seen in the movies didn't mean he'd exhausted all possible powers. After all, this universe might operate under entirely different Kryptonian laws. Now, a wild card had appeared, one he couldn't predict. Ethan's mind raced. This power is dimensional crossing? His pulse quickened at the thought. Crossing where exactly? To another world? Another timeline? Or perhaps some hidden realm beyond all known reality? He sat up, sunlight glinting off his framed jaw. If this was truly a gateway ability, if he could open doorways across dimensions, then everything he understood about Kryptonian biology and physics might be turned on its head. Taking a steadying breath, he prepared himself. Whatever lay ahead, he was determined to master it. Ethan paced the length of his workshop, wrestling with questions he couldn't yet answer. Was his ability anything like the legendary Kryptonian Hales, rewriting history by leaping through time, or was it simply interdimensional travel? If the latter, what realm might he reach? The DC universe? And, crucially, could he ever return? He stopped in front of his workbench and raked a hand through his hair. His current energy reserves were nowhere near the level required for world travel, he reminded himself. Not until he'd advanced to the single universe tier, or better yet, the so-called father level, would the necessary power be within his grasp. Still, speculation only distracted him from real progress. Curiosity won out. Better to see for himself than to worry endlessly. He'd lose focus on all his other research if he didn't test this ability now. With that decision made, Ethan set to work on a specialized battlesuit, less for armor than as a mobile solar battery. Built-in photovoltaic panels would soak up sunlight and funnel it into high-density cells, ensuring he could replenish his energy on the fly. After all, what protection did a Kryptonian really need beyond a steel-hard physique and an internal bioforce field? Suit in hand and power levels stabilized, Ethan took a deep breath. The first trial of his extraordinary gift was about to begin. Ethan raised his chin to the sky, letting the warm sunlight flood his senses. As long as the sun keeps shining and our cells stay charged, we Kryptonians can't be stopped, he reminded himself, clenching his fists. Now, let's go. Travel through time. He concentrated, calling upon every atom of his power. The world around him blurred and rippled, as if he'd stepped into a giant blender. An invisible pressure crushed him from all sides, squeezing his super-dense body through an impossibly narrow corridor. His invulnerable steel-like skin and energy field felt as fragile as glass. Suddenly, there was a soft pop, and he vanished from sight. Moments later, in an empty field, bathed in sunlight, a shapeless lump of crimson tissue materialized and landed with a wet thud on the grass. The sun's rays glinted off its glistening surface, and Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Slowly, inexorably, a bone-white fingerbone pushed its way free from the mass, stretching outward like a skeletal vine seeking the light. The fight for his very existence had begun. Chapter 9. An Unexpected World. Ethan staggered to his feet, wincing as he ran a hand over his side. Damn, next time, warn me before you almost squeeze me to death. He'd always prided himself on keeping a cool head, but right now he felt anything but calm. His body ached as though every atom had been twisted and torn, because they had. The jump between dimensions had drained every joule of energy from his cells, even siphoning off his life force to complete the transfer. His carefully assembled gear lay in splinters on the ground. Every piece of equipment he'd counted on for survival was shattered, his painstaking preparations rendered useless. If he'd landed anywhere except this sunlit clearing, he might never have lived to see it through. He closed his eyes against the glare. This world's sun burned with a fierce, youthful intensity, an ideal power source for someone of Kryptonian heritage, but he couldn't afford to soak it up yet. His cells were still rebooting, every fiber of his being raw and unstable. His first priority was simple: find something to wear and get out of the open before the sunlight could do more harm than good. Peering across the rolling meadow, he spotted a stand of trees on the horizon, a promise of shade and concealment. Testing his legs, he found his strength returning in uneven pulses. With slow, determined steps, Ethan set off toward the tree line, every sense alert to this strange new world and whatever dangers it might hold. Ethan frowned as he considered his situation. Kryptonians had spawned so many mutant strains over the centuries that he couldn't be sure how, or even if, his own powers would adapt here. What kind of world had he landed in? He pushed aside a toppled crate and spotted a sleek terminal tucked beneath a low awning. The technology looked surprisingly advanced. Had he slipped across time or simply stumbled into some parallel dimension? The answer came moments later when an animal, clad in tailored trousers and a vest, strode past on two legs and struck up a conversation with a passerby. This was no mere mirror of Earth. Ethan slid into the terminal's seat and booted it up. The startup logo caught his eye immediately. Capsule Corporation. His pulse quickened. He tapped out a search query, and within seconds the screen filled with images of spiked hair, martial artists, and characters with tails. He was in the world of Dragon Ball. Saiyans, he learned, were the planet's dominant race, a warrior people rumored to possess stomachs so powerful they behaved like antimatter reactors. One hearty meal, a legend said, could obliterate a star 100 light-years away. In this realm, strength ruled all. Ethan leaned back, absorbing the implications. He hadn't just crossed space. He'd crossed into a universe where battle prowess defined destiny. And if he was going to survive here, he'd need to uncover every secret this strange new world had to offer. Ethan stepped into the crowded arena of a grand martial arts tournament, eyes darting over the banners and posters. To his surprise, there was no Jackie Chan, no mention of Master Wu Tian, only competitors representing the Crane Hermit School and the Turtle Hermit School, both respectable but hardly legendary. Leaning against the cool stone wall, he began mentally cataloging what this world had to offer. First and foremost, the Dragon Balls. Any time traveler worth their salt would recognize them as the ultimate prize, 7 mystical orbs capable of granting wishes that rewrite reality. Yet a question nagged at him. Would these artifacts respond to an outsider? Were their powers confined to native inhabitants, or did they extend across dimensions? Ethan had no intention of wasting a wish on eternal life, only to learn it applied solely here, and then being beaten to a pulp the moment he returned home. Next on his list was Ki. With the lone exception of a brutish scion named Broly, every fighter he'd observed manipulated this inner energy as naturally as breathing. Properly honed, Ki could withstand the force of a planet-shattering Big Bang attack. Without it, even a Super Saiyan god could be knocked off his feet by a speeding train. Ethan shook his head in bewilderment. How could beings capable of enduring hundreds of times Earth's gravity remain so physically fragile? As the competitors took their places, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities and pitfalls of this strange new world. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't be bound by its rules for long. Ethan stood quietly, absorbing the full implications of what he'd just learned. Chi was essentially an all-powerful force. With enough training, it could be shaped into electric strikes, like the legendary Thunder Palm, or forged into fire, ice, or virtually any other elemental form. More astonishing still was its raw, destructive potential. In this world, just 200 points of combat power channeled through Chi could obliterate the moon itself. Measured in sheer mass energy, Chi far outstripped even the power of nuclear fusion. According to Dragon Ball lore, Chi is the fundamental life energy residing in every living creature. With disciplined practice, a martial artist can bend that energy to his will. All of the hidden reserves within the body, whether they manifest as courage, vitality, righteousness, or even darker impulses, are simply facets of Chi made tangible. By mastering it, one's body can exceed every natural limit. This principle lies at the heart of Chinese martial arts, particularly Tai Chi, where countless generations have devoted themselves to sensing and controlling Chi. Even in the Dragon Ball Z saga, the sorcerer Babidi built a device capable of measuring and siphoning off Chi, but in Ethan's own era, no technology on Earth can yet detect, let alone store, that energy. And yet, Chi's existence is undeniable. Every time someone has rallied him with a shout or offered him hope, Ethan has felt a surge of strength and resolve that can't be explained by biology alone. He knows now what that force is. Invisible though it may be, it flows through every nerve and fiber of his being. This is Chi, life's most potent power. Although Ethan already wielded potent energy attacks like heat vision, mastering Chi opened the door to abilities far beyond simple destructive force. Chi could be shaped into extraordinary powers, starting with mind reading. Sun Wukong perfected this by placing his palm on a target's head to sift through memories. He once extracted Shaolin's recollections that way. Even more remarkable was Master Turtle's technique. During the martial arts tournament, Chenglong plucked Nanwu's childhood memories of his village's crippling drought from across the arena without laying a finger on him. Chi also enabled psychological sound transmission. Using it, Ethan blocked Shaolin's assassination attempt on Vegeta and intercepted the encrypted messages between King Kai and the Elders. Dream perception was yet another talent. While trapped in a coma after a heart attack, he remotely witnessed the carnage of the Cell War unfolding in real time. And these mental feats were only half the story. On the physical front, Ethan learned instant transmission from the Yardrats, teleporting wherever he detected a key signature. In the underworld, he mastered fusion under Metamo's tutelage, blending bodies and wills into a single, more powerful entity. His greatest triumph came when, as Vegetto, he condensed Chi into a tangible spear, piercing through Buu's flesh and hoisting him aloft like a skewer. He even forged a Chi shield to prevent absorption when he ventured inside Buu's core. From reading minds and sending thoughts across vast distances, to sensing another's Chi for teleportation, to synchronizing energies for fusion, Chi proved endlessly versatile. For Ethan, it wasn't merely a source of power, but a gateway to some of the most wondrous abilities imaginable. Unlike other supernatural abilities that depend on inherited racial traits, Chi-based powers are within reach of anyone who can master Chi. They're both astonishing and enigmatic. Take, for example, chi perception, something as simple as sen, sing energy. It can extend across light years without so much as a transmission delay, making it a truly metaphysical form of awareness. Chapter 10. Dragon Ball Cheats. Ethan spent the morning basking in the Dragon Ball world sunlight, monitoring how his cells responded. He'd long since learned from his time in the Marvel Universe never to stare directly at the sun. Instead, he surrounded himself with a thin, biological force field that filtered the rays to a safe level. Under this controlled exposure, he noted that his cells became unusually active. He wasn't yet sure whether this heightened activity would prove beneficial or harmful, but he filed the data away for future analysis. Deciding not to overthink it, Ethan set out to find Master Crane. He'd already tried seeking out Master Turtle, but Crane was rumored to be far more approachable, and for the right price, he'd teach any student the fundamentals of chi development. When Ethan arrived at the Temple of the Crane Immortal, he stayed polite and reserved. Although Master Crane's style lacked the finesse of Master Turtle's moon-deflecting kame techniques, the raw power of his chi-based attacks was devastating. Ethan didn't know if he was ready for that kind of force. Still, he needed to learn, and he was determined to pay whatever fee Master Crane asked. More than that, he had to ensure his emotions, especially his anger, remained at the right level. If he lost that edge, he'd have no choice but to gather the Dragon Balls and make a wish to restore it. With his Kryptonian-enhanced brain and unrivaled control over his body, Ethan knew he could handle whatever training Crane Immortal threw at him. At least, that's what he told himself. Master Crane, for his part, barely batted an eye at this newcomer. Summoning Ethan into the courtyard, he crossed his arms and gave him a long, assessing look. "You're not the first to seek power through anger," he said quietly, "and you won't be the last. Prove you can withstand my chi, and I might consider taking you on." With that challenge laid down, Ethan squared his shoulders and prepared to strike the first blow. Ethan placed a crisp stack of bills on the table and looked up at his master. "You teach, I pay. Simple enough." Hexienran ran a hand through his long hair, stunned. In less than an hour, Ethan had not only mastered the Crane Senryu stance, but also taken his first tentative steps into channeling chi. He'd never seen anyone pick up techniques so quickly, or with such innate aptitude. "Is this anger?" Hexienran murmured, more to himself than to Ethan. Ethan drew in a deep, measured breath, letting the air settle in his lungs before exhaling in a controlled stream. Instantly, a surge of energy spread through him, filling every fiber of his being. It was as though his body had been waiting for this moment all its life. The sensation was heady, intoxicating. Hexienran's eyes widened. "Your chi, it's astonishing. You've already surpassed my own level of strength. I dare say even my brother wouldn't stand a chance against you." He could feel it clearly. Ethan's chi rose like a pillar toward the sky, vast and self-directed. There'd been no need to teach him how to control such power. Ethan simply did it. This was raw genius, far beyond anything Hexienran had ever encountered. Ethan offered a small, respectful bow. "Thank you, Master. I've paid my dues, and I've learned what I came for. Our teacher-student relationship ends here." With that, he let the bundle of banknotes slide to the floor with a soft thud. Hexienran stared at the scattered money, its familiar scent suddenly sour in his nostrils. He realized, with a curious pang, that Ethan's presence, his raw potential, smelled far sweeter. "Wait, you're leaving already?" Hexienran asked, trying to reclaim the moment. But Ethan simply nodded, his calm confidence saying it all. And with that, Ethan turned and walked away, leaving Hexienran to contemplate the greatest investment he'd ever made. Ethan vanished in a blink, his form blurring as he tapped into his super speed. A torrent of ki poured from him, a raw, unstoppable force that even he struggled to measure. This wasn't the restrained power he had shown before. This was something far greater. The alien energy coursing through him dwarfed anything he'd encountered, and for a moment he couldn't help but wonder just how strong he'd become. With this surge of power, even the legendary Crane Sage would have a tough time keeping up. Before, Ethan estimated his strength at roughly the 100-point tier of Dragon Ball scale combat power. Now? He shook his head. No points or rankings could truly capture the depth of his newfound might. He landed softly on a rooftop, the night air crackling around him. As the adrenaline faded, Ethan's sharp mind refocused on his goal, the dragon treasures. He'd already claimed the Sphere of Purity and the Crown of Insight, but there was one prize he still coveted above all, super divine water. He recalled the legends. Unlike the ordinary sacred waters gathered by lesser mystics, super divine water looked and tasted like any common spring. Yet within its seemingly innocuous drops lay a wild, ancient power. Its magic didn't just cleanse, it unlocked hidden potential, blasting one's abilities into entirely new realms. Warriors who braved its toxicity reported strides of strength and speed they'd never dreamed possible. Of course, the water's curse was as potent as its blessing. Its toxins could corrode the body, twist the mind, even drive the strongest soul to madness. Only those with iron wills and the means to counteract its poison would survive the transformation. Ethan stared at the distant glow of the treasure vault. He had no intention of letting toxicity stand in his way. If super divine water could lift him further beyond his limits, then he would endure whatever suffering awaited. He launched himself back into the night, ki flaring like a comet tail. The next chapter of his journey was about to begin, and this time there would be no turning back. Chapter 7. The Tower of Callan. Ethan hovered just outside the narrow canyon entrance, his keen eyes fixed on the crystalline pool ahead. Legend said that only those with pure hearts could drink the super divine water, an ancient gift from the earth gods, without succumbing to its deadly venom. For mortals, drinking it required immense willpower to purge its toxicity and unlock latent potential. Nearby, a cluster of fairy beans lay half-buried in sun-dappled soil, each one said to grant prodigious power to whoever consumed it. Unfortunately, the canyon was so tight its treasures couldn't be carried away. Ethan smiled wryly. If the super divine water could transform a mere mortal into a warrior as mighty as Sun Wukong's silverback gorillas, what heights might it yield to someone of Kryptonian heritage? After all, every moment spent under his native sun was like ingesting 100 magical beans at once. Poison him? Not a chance. He pivoted upward, gathering himself in midair. Finding the Tower of Callan had been trivial. He simply flew straight to its spire. Now he drifted before the tower's single window, from which a feline silhouette observed him. "Who are you?" called a crisp voice. The cat immortal perched on the tower's ledge bristled, eyes narrowing as it sensed Ethan's presence and the overwhelming aura radiating from him, a tide of power that pulsed with godlike intensity. Ethan offered a calm nod. "My name is Ethan. I seek the super divine water, and answers only this tower can give." The cat immortal's tail swished in irritation. "Few mortals are worthy. Few dare approach. State your purpose, Kryptonian, or begone." Ethan's gaze remained steady. "I come not to plunder, but to prove myself. Let me pass." For a long moment, only the wind played between them. Then the cat immortal's shoulders eased. "Very well," it purred. "Step inside if you dare." With that, the narrow window slid open, revealing a spiral ramp that wound deep into the rock. Ethan took a measured breath and prepared to descend, each step carrying him closer to the legendary waters and the destiny that awaited him. Ethan regarded the small feline figure perched on the marble pedestal before him. Its fur was a luster, mouse silver, and its eyes glowed with otherworldly intelligence. "I mean no harm, Cat Sage," he said calmly. "May I ask what brings you here?" The cat sage's whiskers twitched. "I seek the super divine water." Ethan offered a wry smile. "Do you even know what you're asking for? Did Wu Tian tell you about it?" The cat sage bowed its head slightly, ears flattening with surprise. "I am aware of the risk. Everyone who's drunk the super divine water so far has perished." "It doesn't matter," Ethan replied. "Surely someone must have survived?" Ethan shook his head. "No one." For a moment, the two regarded each other in silence. Then, with an unexpected grace, the cat sage turned and retrieved a small porcelain teapot from the shadows. Embossed on its side was the single golden character, Shen, God. Ethan exhaled in relief. "Ah, the simplified version from the comic legends," he murmured. "In the original tale, you'd have to venture into the northern labyrinth, face the trial of inner darkness, and petition the mountain deity itself for approval. I'm not sure I would have had the patience for that." The cat sage lifted the teapot and poured a single crystalline cup. The liquid inside shimmered with an almost hypnotic glow. Placing it gently in Ethan's hand, The cat spoke softly. That should be enough. Ethan stared at the cup for a long moment, heart pounding. Then, with steady resolve, he raised it to his lips. Chapter 11, Super Divine Water and Magic Beans. Ethan took the cup of super divine water from the cat fairy. The liquid inside glowed with an otherworldly purple sheen. He studied it for a moment, then looked up with a playful grin. "Hey, cat fairy, did you remember to wash this cup first?" The cat fairy's ears twitched, and a bead of sweat rolled down its forehead. "Wah," it sputtered. After a panicked glance, it added, "I was, just joking." Ethan laughed softly and tipped the cup back in one smooth motion, draining every drop. The porcelain clattered to the floor as a scorching heat roared up his throat, spreading through his chest like wildfire. It felt as if his very bones were being torn apart. Still, Ethan didn't cry out or collapse. He closed his eyes and engaged his superbrain, scanning his body's condition and routing out the pain. Before setting out on his journey, he'd stored vast reserves of solar energy in his cells, and his superbrain was primed to monitor and redistribute it. If ever his stores ran low, he could simply step into the sun and recharge. The cat fairy gaped at him in astonishment. In all its centuries of watching mortals consume super divine water, it had never seen anyone do so in absolute calm, no fear, no joy, no agony. For the very first time, a recipient had sipped the fabled elixir without a single shadow of emotion crossing his face. Ethan's breathing was so faint and erratic that, were it not for the faint rise and fall of his chest, the cat immortal might have sworn he was dead. The immortal's whiskers twitched in disbelief. What unbreakable will could endure such relentless agony? For 5 or maybe 6 hours, Ethan lay motionless. Then, without warning, his dormant Kryptonian cells erupted in a ferocity that shook the chamber. In that moment, the cat immortal thought he glimpsed a monstrous avatar of raw power roaring behind Ethan's eyes. Such potential! It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. At last, Ethan drew a deep, liberating breath and collapsed. Though he had learned to block the worst of the pain, his body was inevitably spent. Pain, after all, is the body's alarm system. Yet his recovery was nothing short of miraculous. In barely a heartbeat, he was already stirring, feeling strength surge through his veins. He recalled how Sun Wukong, after drinking the supreme divine water, had doubled his combat power from 180 to 260. Impressive as it was, among Saiyans that kind of growth was almost routine. But what Ethan had just experienced felt different, far more profound. He could not yet gauge his new power level, but he sensed it towered well above his previous limits. And with that realization came a single, unwavering conviction. This was only the beginning. Ethan knew he was nowhere near as powerful as Raditz yet, and that realization left him wanting more. His next move was clear. He needed to summon Shenlong and wish away the genetic limits holding him back. With that kind of boost, he could become infinitely stronger, just like Clark, or perhaps even unlock the fabled Doomsday Mode. He'd already weighed the odds. Earth's or Namek's Dragon Balls might falter under so colossal a request. Only the Super Dragon Balls could guarantee success. But arriving in the Dragon Ball world empty-handed felt reckless. He needed black tech safeguards, capsule technology, at the very least, so he could store anything vital without fear of loss. And if the capsule somehow failed, he could always slip back to the Marvel dimension and deploy PIM particles instead. His powers let him shift between universes, opening new coordinates at will, a bizarre but invaluable advantage. When the cat immortal finally appeared, Ethan offered a respectful bow. "Thank you for your help. Before we proceed, could you spare some senzu beans and a vial of super divine water?" "Ah, you've already unlocked your full potential. Why do you still need super divine water?" the cat fairy asked, genuinely puzzled. Yet he handed it over without hesitation when Ethan pressed a fresh catch of fish into his paws. Of course, the fairy had no idea those fish hadn't come from some secret stash. They'd been caught mere moments ago. With his Kryptonian-level speed, Ethan had dashed to the nearby river and back so quickly that it was as if he'd never left. After all, if Sun Wukong could sprint through a crowd to reclaim Master Roshi's sunglasses in the blink of an eye, Ethan's speed and his combat prowess made comparable feats a walk in the park. Before long, Ethan walked away not only with a full jar of super divine water, but with 5 more jars of senzu beans. In earlier eras, these beans had been so plentiful they were measured by the jar. By the time of Dragon Ball Z, rare as they'd become, collectors counted them grain by grain. Of course, senzu beans aren't a cure-all. They work wonders for restoring stamina and healing internal and external injuries, but they can't cure illnesses. And in a world of constant battles, few things are more valuable than that. Here's a polished, idiomatic rewrite of the scene with Luther renamed to Ethan and clarified as male. That chapter of the android conflict ended in tragedy. Afflicted by the dreaded heart virus, Goku found even the legendary senzu beans powerless. He died in his prime, and with his passing went the hope of the Z Warriors. The world fell into chaos, and Trunks' future became a wasteland of loss and sorrow. Yet Saiyan physiology combined with the miraculous healing of senzu beans could accelerate their growth. And so Ethan stood before the Cat Immortal's altar, a bowl of fresh river fish trembling in his outstretched hands. "Cat Immortal," he said earnestly, "please tend these senzu seeds with all your skill. I'll bring you fish whenever you need them." Ethan bowed respectfully and turned to leave. "Thank you, I understand." The Cat Immortal, a lithe, fur-coated deity perched atop an ornate pedestal, barely blinked. To him, senzu beans held no value. Their restoration of vitality was meaningless if one's spirit lacked purpose. And yet, if Ethan truly wished it, the Cat Immortal could ensure a bountiful harvest. From the newcomer's aura, the Cat Immortal sensed something rare, strength tempered by humility and an absence of malice. Few warriors of such power were so politely spoken. As Ethan slipped away from the shrine, his mind was already drifting to other mysteries, chief among them the super-divine water. He intended to study it, to uncover precisely how its celestial properties unlocked hidden potential in those who drank it. Such knowledge, he was certain, could change the course of the coming battles, and perhaps rewrite fate itself. Chapter 12. Universal Capsule Technology. Ethan stepped into the sleek lobby of Capsule Corporation's headquarters, his heart racing with anticipation. In the Dragon Ball universe, capsule technology wasn't just convenient, it was revolutionary. From portable homes to instant vehicles, these black tech marvels had reshaped everyday life. And behind many of the fiercest breakthroughs, like the Red Ribbon Army's artificial humans capable of facing off with Super Saiyans, stood Dr. Brief. Ethan couldn't help but feel both admiration and envy. How could anyone explore this world and ignore its advanced science? More importantly, might these innovations work in other universes? A glass door slid open, and Ethan found himself face to face with Dr. Brief. Despite presiding over one of Bulma's family enterprises, the doctor greeted him with warm enthusiasm, as though welcoming an old friend. It was a rare sight. Most corporate heads wouldn't spare a moment for an unannounced visitor. Ethan drew in a steadying breath. "Dr. Brief, my name is Ethan Drake. I'm a researcher, and I've long admired your work. I was hoping, if you had space in your program, I'd love the chance to study under you." Dr. Brief's kind eyes lit up behind round spectacles. He chuckled softly. "Well, thank you for your kind words. I've had plenty of aspiring students stop by, all eager to contribute." He steepled his fingers and studied Ethan thoughtfully. "But be warned, my current projects keep me busier than ever. I already have more assistants than I can manage." Ethan nodded, undeterred. "I understand. I'm prepared to work hard and adapt to whatever you need." Dr. Brief smiled, impressed by the young man's resolve. "Very well, Ethan. Let's take a tour of the labs. I'll introduce you to the team and see where you might fit in." As they walked deeper into the facility, Ethan felt a surge of excitement. Here, in these corridors of cutting-edge science, lay the technology that conquered universes, and perhaps the key to his own journey beyond. Dr. Brief hadn't taken on a research assistant in years. He'd grown accustomed to handling every problem himself. He didn't bring it up. He didn't want to discourage any eager applicant. So when Ethan spoke up, Brev looked up in surprise. "Dr. Brave," Ethan said without hesitation, "if you have a project in mind, assign it to me. I'll prove my abilities." Brave studied the young man's determined expression. It was bold and intriguing. After a moment's thought, he decided to set Ethan a genuine challenge. "Very well," he said. "I've only recently perfected a method to prevent food stored in capsules from spoiling. It's a tricky piece of work. See how far you get." Ethan nodded. He skimmed the overview Brave handed him, then frowned. I've never worked with capsule technology before. I'll need some background material, standards, design specs, whatever you can share. That was fine with Brave. He gathered the relevant research notes, diagrams, and test logs, then left them on Ethan's desk. He wasn't worried the technology would leak. For decades, the Universal Capsule Company had held an iron grip on the market. Even during the Super Saiyan period, no competitor had come close to unseating them. Besides, Brave didn't really expect Ethan to succeed. He wanted the young man to fail convincingly, then walk away. Patiently, he closed the door and let Ethan get to work. If the newcomer gave up in frustration, all the better. But if he didn't, well, that would be an interesting development. Within an hour, Ethan returned with his own take on the problem. Dr. Brev stared at the blueprints in disbelief. Ethan's design wasn't as sleek as Dr. Breve's own, but to his amazement, it was fully functional. The reason became clear the moment he remembered his own precaution. He had deliberately hidden critical details of the capsule's inner workings. Even without that core data, Ethan had pieced together a workable solution. That was no mere aptitude, it was genius. Ethan met Dr. Breve's astonished gaze and offered a confident smile. So, did I pass the test? Dr. Brave ran a hand through his hair. This is excellent work, Ethan, but how did you manage it without the full specs? Ethan leaned back, relaxed. It wasn't a problem. My neural interface, my so-called superbrain, can hold the combined knowledge of 50-plus universes at once. Loading the principles of capsule technology took seconds, and well, inspiration did the rest. Dr. Brave shook his head, impressed. That's incredible. Why haven't I heard of you before? Ethan shrugged. I've been busy studying. He tapped the edge of the table. But now you have, and I hope you're ready for what comes next. Ethan watched as Dr. Brief nodded, clearly pleased by what he'd just seen. Within days, Ethan officially joined Capsule Corporation's R&D division. Brief wasn't about to overwork his newest recruit. Ethan received a generous salary, excellent benefits, and almost unfettered access to the lab's precision instruments. The only condition, he had to return every device to its original settings so it wouldn't interfere with Brief's own long-term experiments. For Ethan, this was a dream come true. His primary goal was to unravel the genetic mysteries of Kryptonians, and now he had the resources to throw himself into that research without distraction. Sure, he could have solved half his problems with a single wish on a Dragon Ball, calling up all of Capsule Corp's technology in an instant. But Ethan didn't want to waste such a rare prize on shortcuts. Instead, he relied on his enhanced intellect and tireless work ethic. Less than 24 hours after first laying hands on Capsule Corp's blueprints, Ethan had mastered every facet of the company's compact storage capsule technology. He emerged from the lab the next morning to find Dr. Brief staring at him with wide-eyed astonishment. After all, it had taken the good doctor most of his life to perfect that very system. Ethan's laboratory was already a veritable treasure trove of cutting-edge inventions, gravity chambers, prototype spacecraft designs, even plans for a parallel universe time machine. But none of it was quite as spectacular as his daughter Bulma's latest discovery. One afternoon, she slipped into the lab unannounced and froze in the doorway, her eyes widening at the sight of him. "Brother Ethan," she purred, all sweetness and charm. Ethan looked up from the fusion coil he was calibrating. "What's up, Bulma?" He knew better than to be fooled by her coy, ladylike act. Bulma could be as scheming as she was affectionate, yet he didn't mind her playful attention. After all, he was the undisputed pioneer of what people quietly called black technology, a time machine that hops between parallel dimensions. He'd built the blueprint himself. Bulma stepped inside, her excitement barely contained. "Are you free today? Let's go out and have some fun." To Bulma, there was nothing more thrilling than Ethan's rare blend of world-class athleticism and unmatched scientific genius. For her, a day spent with a super-athlete scientist like Ethan was simply irresistible. Chapter 13. Genius Bulma. "No, Bulma, not unless you help me solve this." Ethan flashed her his most disarming grin. He knew how effective his charm could be, and with so much on the line, a little flirtation was the least he could offer. "What's the problem?" Bulma asked, though the glint in her eyes betrayed her curiosity. Though she was only 18, her reputation for mechanical genius and black tech innovation was already legendary. Ethan placed a small vial on her workbench. Inside, a luminous emerald liquid pulsed softly. I call this super divine water. It unlocks the body's hidden potential, but with a fatality rate that's just too high. I need you to refine it, reduce the risks. Bulma pushed her blue bangs out of her face. You want me to do biochemistry? You know my specialty is machines, electronics, anything with gears or circuits. Cells and enzymes aren't really my thing. Exactly why you're perfect, Ethan countered. If anyone can crack this, it's you. You've rebuilt hovercraft engines overnight and reprogrammed capsule company cars on the fly. A little biotech challenge won't scare you. She studied the vial like it was a new puzzle. Bulma wasn't one to back down. She'd journeyed solo across continents for Dragon Balls, faced down sky pirates, and come out on top. Brushing a strand of hair from her face, she finally grinned. All right, she said, I'll take a look, but on two conditions. I get full access to the lab, and you compensate me handsomely. Ethan's relief was instant. You name the price, and it's yours. Bulma lifted her goggles onto her forehead. Good, now step aside. Let me work my magic, and remember, you owe me more than just your gratitude. Ethan laughed as he moved out of her way. Deal. Ethan watched Bulma hurry away, a wry smile tugging at his lips. He knew exactly how driven she was, and how strong her obsession had become. Right now, her sole aim was to prove herself indispensable to him, to capture his attention with her brilliance, and then, well, he could only imagine what she had in mind. Shaking his head, Ethan turned back to his workbench. He couldn't depend entirely on Bulma's intervention. If her plan fell through, the time and effort she'd invested would be wasted. Besides, she'd been wrestling with the problem of senzu bean production for years without success. If that were truly her specialty, she would have already explored mass cultivation to keep the Z fighters in fighting shape. No, he needed a more reliable solution. Over the past few weeks, Ethan had made a far more promising discovery: the properties of super divine water. Exactly how the cat immortal had come by such a substance remained a mystery, but its potential was staggering and frighteningly volatile for anyone without extreme resilience. Now Ethan's research was focused on three simultaneous goals. 1. Purification, removing impurities that made the water unstable. 2. Optimization, tweaking its composition so he could harness its power without destroying his own body. 3. Dilution, how to temper the water's raw strength so that allies could benefit from its healing properties without suffering catastrophic side effects. Purification and optimization were for his own use, but finding a safe way to administer the super divine water to his friends could change everything. With renewed determination, Ethan leaned over his notes and resumed his experiments. Time was short, and every second counted. Ethan had long ago concluded that even the super divine water he'd acquired wasn't enough to push his abilities to their absolute limit. If he wanted a truly perfected super soldier serum, he'd need a far better batch. During his intensive research, he also cracked one of the most coveted secrets in the known multiverse: universal capsule technology. So far, he'd kept this breakthrough entirely to himself, and even Dr. Breve, normally suspicious of Ethan's unconventional methods, hadn't caught on. Breve sensed Ethan was hiding something, but he was so enthralled by Ethan's unorthodox genius that he never quite managed to pin down the source of his protégé's edge. Ethan had no intention of introducing full-scale capsule production back in the Marvel Universe. The technology was too advanced and too fraught with unforeseen consequences to risk wholesale adoption. Instead, he planned to miniaturize the concept, develop compact storage devices capable of holding rare and valuable artifacts from other dimensions. In particular, he had his sights set on the Dragon Ball universe's most prized resources: senzu beans, super divine water, and, above all, the mystical fruits of the spirit tree. By assembling the 7 Dragon Balls, Ethan knew he could summon Shenron and wish for spirit tree seeds. Given the vast resources of the Marvel cosmos, finding a suitable living planet to nurture them wouldn't be difficult. Once established, the spirit tree would yield an endless bounty of miraculous fruits, an asset far more potent than any vial of super divine water. With every element secured, Ethan would refine his super soldier compound to heights never before imagined, and all without raising more than a whisper of suspicion from his colleagues. Chapter 10: Bulma's Breakthrough. Ethan didn't expect Bulma to return so quickly. Barely 3 days had passed since he'd handed over 100 milliliters of super divine water for her experiments, and now she strode into his workshop, clutching a small vial, her eyes alight with excitement. "What do you have there?" Ethan asked, setting aside his tools. Bulma placed the vial on the bench. Inside, a glowing crimson liquid pulsed like captured lightning. "Behold, my optimized serum," she announced. "I reverse-engineered the original super divine water, then tweaked the formula. The mortality rate is cut in half." Ethan raised his eyebrows. 50%? That's an incredible improvement. What kind of effects are we seeing? Bulma leaned in, enthusiasm barely contained. "I tested it on lab rats. They mutated into what I'm calling super rats, strong enough to chew through steel bars." "Super rats," Ethan mused, tapping his chin. "Impressive. But how did you isolate the ingredients so fast?" She smiled, recalling her last adventure. "I stumbled on an ancient map fragment in the ruins near Crescent Falls. It led me to the hidden alchemy archives where the original concoction was first recorded." Ethan chuckled. "Leave it to you to turn a treasure hunt into a research breakthrough." Bulma's grin faded and was replaced by a look of mock indignation. "Ethan, you promised me another sample of the water. I need at least 50 more milliliters for durability tests and extended trials." Carefully, he sealed her optimized serum in a protective case. "Relax. I've secured more than enough, but before you run off, where do you want to take this next?" Bulma tapped her lip thoughtfully. "There's an abandoned research lab up north, in the frozen sector. Word is, their cold storage and containment cells are still functional." Ethan nodded. "The Northern Reclamation Lab, then. It's perfect. Dry vaults, backup power, everything we need to keep your serum stable." Bulma's eyes sparkled. "Adventure, and actual lab equipment. Let's go." Ethan stood, gathering their supplies. With Bulma's genius and his resources combined, they were closer than ever to mastering the secrets of super divine water and unlocking alchemical breakthroughs that could change their world. Ethan tugged at his seatbelt as Bulma sped along the highway in her sleek convertible. She glanced over at him, eyes shining with excitement. "How about we spend the day at the amusement park?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Sounds great to me." Within minutes, Bulma turned off the main road onto a private lane shaded by tall pines. "This place belongs to my family," she explained. "It's a perk of running the Universal Capsule Company." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You really have everything taken care of, don't you?" Bulma laughed and parked near the entrance. "Let's go have fun." They stepped through the gates into a riot of color and sound, spinning rides, autumn candy stands, and laughter echoing in the afternoon sun. Bulma grabbed Ethan's hand and led him straight for the haunted house. Inside, cobwebs, flickering lanterns, and animatronic ghouls lurked around every corner. Bulma shrieked and clung to his arm, playing the part of the frightened visitor perfectly. Ethan gently guided her through each jump scare, grinning at her playful terror. When they emerged blinking into daylight, Bulma insisted on the merry-go-round next. As the painted horses rose and fell to a tinkling Calliope tune, she chose the prancing white steed beside his. She leaned close, her hair brushing his shoulder, and Ethan felt a warm flutter in his chest. By mid-afternoon, they'd tried nearly every ride. Roller coasters that flipped them upside down, bumper cars that sent them skidding into each other, and the Ferris wheel, where they paused at the top to admire a panorama of the city skyline. Ethan was in no hurry. Every ride with Bulma was time well spent. When they finally slowed to a stop, Bulma slipped her hand into his and led him to a quiet bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. She looked up at him, cheeks flushed with joy. "Thanks for coming with me," she said softly. Ethan reached out and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I had a great time." Before he could say more, Bulma pressed a quick kiss to his lips. It was warm and sweet, the perfect end to a perfect day. Ethan's heart sped up as he realized just how much fun and how much Bulma meant to him. And as they walked back to her car, hand in hand, he knew this was only the beginning of their adventure together. Chapter 14, Confession. Ethan had never been interested in little girls like Bulma. His taste ran toward elegant, mature women. Yet he couldn't ignore Bulma's genius in genetics and cell biology. If anyone could help him overcome the Kryptonian genetic ceiling, it was her. So Ethan resolved to submit himself entirely to Bulma's research, hoping she could unlock the secret to blending Kryptonian and Saiyan DNA, the ultimate power boost he craved. Most Saiyans were unimpressive fighters, with only a handful, led by the legendary Sun Wukong, proving truly formidable. These aerial warriors amazed the multiverse when they first revealed the Super Saiyan transformation, a fabled state of near-limitless strength and dazzling golden aura. Ordinary Saiyans paled in comparison. Ethan's plan was simpler and bolder: unite his own cells with those of Broly, the fabled legendary Super Saiyan. Broly wasn't an aerial fighter, but a true berserker, his massive ape-like physique as durable as steel. Sun Wukong himself had clashed against Broly for hours without ever piercing his defense, an ironclad testament to the berserker's resilience. As Ethan prepared for this radical procedure, he steeled himself for the risk. To become more than Kryptonian or Saiyan, to forge a new apex warrior, he would have to trust Bulma completely. And with that trust came a confession he could no longer hold back. You should know that at first, Broly didn't even understand how to harness ki for offense or defense. He fought purely with brute strength. Even more astonishing, his power skyrocketed so quickly that in a matter of hours, he matched what Sun Wukong and Vegeta had each spent years perfecting. Naturally, Ethan wanted to make the most of such talent. "Brother Ethan, I had so much fun today. Thank you," Bulma said, her eyes sparkling, her cheeks flushed with a shy happiness. She genuinely appreciated how carefully he'd looked after her. Though his manner sometimes felt as if he were doting on a little sister, Bulma recognized it as a genuine kindness and a huge step forward. Ethan smiled in return. "No, thank you. You helped me solve something important today, too." He'd already worked out that, given her age and ambition, Bulma would soon be back out hunting Dragon Balls. But now that he'd arrived on the scene, her motivation might be tempered. Still, he had a plan. He knew one of the Dragon Balls was already hidden in her father's warehouse. With his enhanced vision, he'd spotted it among Dr. Brief's miscellaneous gadgets and spare parts. The good doctor, indifferent to mystical artifacts, must have tossed it onto a shelf without a second thought. Perhaps it arrived as a gift and was forgotten. Ethan's lips curved into a knowing smile. Between Broly's explosive growth and Bulma's hidden treasure, things were finally starting to move in his favor. Ethan sat hunched over the dragon radar, his fingers dancing across the display as he traced the final signal. He'd almost cracked the puzzle of locating all 7 Dragon Balls at once. With a triumphant flick of his wrist, he handed the device back to Bulma. "Here you go, our first real lead," he said, flashing an eager grin. Before Bulma could respond, she felt herself lift off the ground. Panic flared in her chest as she stared at Ethan's outstretched hand. He was pulling her upward, defying gravity itself. A faint, shimmering field of energy emanated from his other hand, wrapping around her torso and keeping her arm from snapping under the strain. "We're flying?" she blurted, eyes wide with disbelief. Ethan's expression turned serious. "Yes, there's something I need to tell you. I'm not from Earth. I'm a Kryptonian, from the lost planet Krypton." Bulma hovered on tiptoe, peering desperately at the empty air beneath her feet. "A Kryptonian? You mean you're an alien?" He held her gaze steadily. "I know it sounds impossible, but it's the truth, and I need your help, Bulma." Her heart pounded, excitement, fear, and curiosity all at once. After a moment's hesitation, she squared her shoulders. "Then you have whatever you need, Ethan." As the two of them floated against the backdrop of a star-strewn sky, a new adventure began, one that neither of them could have ever predicted. Whether it was the dizzying height of the suspension bridge, her instinctive fear of such heights, or the fact that Ethan's flawless profile was suddenly so close, Bulma felt her heart turn into a wild whirlwind. Her head spun, her vision blurred, and she grew lightheaded. And on top of everything else, Ethan was an alien. It was enough to set her imagination racing a mile a minute. Ethan, however, had a far more practical motive for revealing his true identity. He assumed that if Bulma knew he was Kryptonian, she could better assist him in studying alien genetics. He certainly didn't mean to cause a romantic flutter in her. He couldn't read minds after all. "Thanks, Bulma," he said quietly once they were safely across. "Thank you? No, thank you," Bulma replied, cheeks pink with embarrassment and something far more thrilling. Before long, they made their way back to the Brief residence. As they stepped through the front door, Bulma's mother appeared in the hallway. "Bulma, sweetie, you're back late," Mrs. Brief teased, her eyes twinkling as she took in her daughter's flushed face. Then her gaze shifted to Ethan. "And who's your friend?" Ethan stood tall and composed, his broad shoulders straight, his posture every bit the picture of confidence. He wasn't slouching in a turtleneck, nor did he have any awkward habits that teenage boys often displayed. His striking appearance, sharp jawline, clear eyes, and easy, self-assured smile made him stand out instantly. Mrs. Brief smiled politely, unaware that this handsome young man was not just a guest, but Bulma's new research assistant, and, more astonishing still, an alien from another world. Mrs. Brief eyed Ethan as though he were Bulma's classmate, or worse, her boyfriend. Bulma's cheeks turned bright red. "Mom, I was just out for a walk. Please, come in. You haven't had your beauty treatment yet," she blurted, practically shoving her mother into the house. Ethan offered Mrs. Brief a polite smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Brief," he said lightly, then turned and walked away. Chapter 15. The Dragon Balls Are Within Reach. The next morning, Ethan was still going over his plans when a familiar voice rang out at his door. "Ethan, open up," Bulma called cheerfully. She didn't have to attend classes, after all she was a genius, and she was positively buzzing with excitement at the prospect of helping him. He swung the door open to find her practically vibrating with energy. "Good morning," she said, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "So, what's this big problem you needed me for?" Ethan stepped aside to let her in and motioned toward the living room. Once they were seated, he took a deep breath. "It's genetic," he began. "Kryptonian society is idealized. From birth, each individual is engineered for a specific role. Scientists, warriors, administrators. Everything's predetermined by our DNA. I don't even know which category I fall under, and I want to break free of it." Bulma's eyes widened. "Wait, so your entire career and your potential are locked in at conception?" He nodded. "Exactly. I need you to bypass that genetic limiter. My theory is, if you can unlock it, I could tap into powers like the Doomsday species, maybe even exceed them. And who's to say the average Doomsday can't evolve into something far stronger?" Bulma ran a hand through her hair, her brow furrowed. But the Kryptonians don't reproduce naturally? You said you were produced in an artificial womb. That means you never developed emotional hormones the way Earthlings do." Ethan exhaled. "Right, that's part of the problem. I don't know if I'm even capable of feeling like you, and I would want me to feel. If I become, well, a controllable Doomsday, will I still have any emotions? Will I still care?" Bulma's heart tightened. She realized in that moment just how high the stakes were, not only for his power but for his humanity. "Ethan," she said softly, "we'll figure it out. I've studied genetics, biochemistry, even the weirdest alien physiology you can imagine. If there's a way to reintroduce emotional hormones without destabilizing your cells, I'll find it." He offered her a grateful smile. "That's why I came to you." She stood, determination shining in her eyes. "Then let's get to work. First, I'll analyze your genetic code, see where they've inserted those role-determining sequences. Then we'll design a targeted gene editing protocol to knock them out. After that, we test for hormone production. If everything works, you'll be free from Kryptonian constraints, and you might just become something nobody's ever seen." Ethan's pulse quickened. The Dragon Balls were close at hand, but the real prize would be the freedom to choose his own destiny, and perhaps to finally feel at home in his own body. With Bulma by his side, he felt a hope he hadn't known he could have. The next phase of their plan was about to begin, and nothing would stop them. Ethan's emotions did exist, but only within narrow limits imposed by his Kryptonian physiology. His feelings were drawn from memory, allowing him to sense such basic stimuli as pain, but even those sensations grew faint over time. On Krypton, emotional suppression was engineered to keep warriors focused. True fear or love simply didn't develop, and natural reproduction was rendered unnecessary, let alone the more delicate sentiments prized by so-called scientific Kryptonians. "That's exactly what's been bothering me, Bulma," Ethan admitted one evening. At his side, Bulma's eyes narrowed with determination. If he couldn't fully feel, how could they ever be together as more than friends? From that moment, she threw herself into genetics, cytology, molecular biology, leaving no textbook unturned. She spent nights poring over research papers, and days tinkering with advanced Dragon Ball-era bioinstruments. Ethan didn't just stand by. Though he trusted Bulma's brilliance, he wasn't about to be a passive bystander. He too scoured the Capsule Corporation archives, convinced that somewhere amid the black tech breakthroughs of their world lay a loophole he could exploit. A month later, Bulma burst into the lab, her lab coat flapping like a banner. "Ethan, I've done it," she cried, voice trembling with excitement. Ethan looked up from his workstation just as Bulma activated the genetic sequencer. On its display, the neon readouts confirmed her triumph. The emotional lock genes had been successfully deactivated. Bulma practically danced around him. "I've unlocked your genetic restrictions. You should start feeling everything you've been missing. Joy, sadness, fear, love, all of it." Ethan stood, processing the moment. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Turning to her, he said softly, "Thank you, Bulma. I can't wait to see what it's like to feel real emotion, starting with how happy I am that you did this for me." And for the first time, Ethan knew he could fully return her love in kind. Bulma smiled as she watched Ethan's expression. His grin looked far more natural now than it ever had before. "You're already finished?" she asked, surprised. Ethan turned to her, eyes bright. They called it a restriction, but it really just meant removing a malformed gene and figuring out how to restore the proper sequence. He outlined his entire process, how he identified the splicing error, used complementary nucleotide sequences to bypass the faulty segment, and then reinserted the correct genetic code. All the while, he felt a quiet thrill. In his mind, he was racing Bulma, refusing to fall behind. After all, he was Kryptonian. He might not have been trained as a scientist in his homeworld, but his supercharged intellect was itching for a challenge. While Bulma had taken time to rest, Ethan worked straight through the night. When dawn came, he'd already cracked the problem. But Bulma's approach wasn't merely to patch over the defect. Instead, she wanted to trace the gene's ancestry, map its origins back through successive iterations until they understood its true primordial form. When Ethan heard her plan, a fresh spark lit in his eyes. Science, he realized, wasn't limited to a single method or goal. Repairing the emotional bond within the gene was only the beginning. The real breakthrough lay in lifting the hidden constraints, unlocking the full potential of Kryptonian biology. And with Bulma's insight guiding him, he knew this was just the first step toward something far greater. Ethan had hardly been idle over the past month. When his bold plan to engineer Kryptonian, or even Doomsday, genes fell flat, he quietly turned his attention elsewhere. First on his agenda, building a dragon radar. Within days, that compact device hummed to life. Still, every Kryptonian test sample he'd cultivated fizzled, and his dreams of a Doomsday strain remained just that, dreams. It was time for Plan B, find the Dragon Balls themselves. Thanks to ancient records he'd unearthed, and his own photographic memory, Ethan knew the precise whereabouts of all 7 Dragon Balls. He even recalled the secret resting place of the elusive second ball. With that knowledge, he realized he could make 2 wishes in quick succession, so long as he waited a full year between grantings. His first wish? Teleportation straight to Broly's location, so he could harvest the Saiyan's genes for his experiments. Clad in his inconspicuous black coat, Ethan activated his super speed and X-ray vision. In under 24 hours, he'd gathered every easily accessible orb. Along the way, he crossed paths with a small, wide-eyed boy calling himself Little Wukong. The youngster was frantic. His grandfather's magic beads had gone missing, and he was determined to track them down. To Little Wukong, Ethan was a stranger. He had no inkling that this quiet man in black was on a far more dangerous quest. 2 balls proved more troublesome. They belonged to the scheming King Pilaf. Unlike the gentle, well-meaning Wukong, Pilaf never hesitated to sow chaos for his own gain. He refused every peaceful offer of negotiation. Ethan, however, had little patience for Pilaf's theatrics. In one swift, merciless stroke, he ended the tyrant's reign, snuffing out Pilaf's life so cleanly that not a drop of blood touched the soil. Then, without looking back, Ethan retrieved the last 2 Dragon Balls from Pilaf's trembling hands. He spared Little Wukong and the boy's companions any harm. After all, they'd posed no real threat, and vanished before they could even say thank you. By sunset, the 7 orbs lay safely stowed in Ethan's coat pockets. Now, with the Dragon Balls in his grasp, he only had to wait for the Eternal Dragon's appearance. Soon, the first of his two coveted wishes would be his, and with it, the chance to claim Broly's genetic power once and for all. Once his two companions slipped away, Ethan turned his attention to the last Dragon Ball, the one worn by Turtle Immortal. He carefully suppressed his ki, using his biological force field in tandem with his Kryptonian training to mask every trace of his presence, even more effectively than any android could manage. Inside the hut, the venerable Turtle Immortal lay in a deep, dreamless sleep, utterly unaware of the intruder at his side. Ethan reached out, gently unclasped the Dragon Ball from the old master's neck, and tucked it safely into his pouch. Not a muscle twitched on Turtle Immortal's weathered face. With all 7 Dragon Balls finally in his possession, Ethan exhaled in quiet relief. Chapter 16. Finding Broly. Ethan stood alone on the barren plain, the 7 Dragon Balls spread in a circle at his feet. Taking a deep breath, he called out, "Shenron, I summon you!" Instantly, the Dragon Balls shone with blinding light. They lifted from the ground, spun together at incredible speed, and shot into the sky. Thunder cracked, lightning tore across the heavens, and as if night had fallen in an instant, a colossal, serpentine dragon emerged from the roiling clouds. "I am Shenron," the dragon rumbled, its voice echoing across the wasteland. "State your wish. I will grant it, but you have only one." Ethan squared his shoulders. The planet around him was deserted, windswept ruins, ash-gray plains, no sign of life, and he hadn't come all this way to scout on foot. He needed help. "I wish to bring the legendary Super Saiyan Broly here," he said firmly. Shenron's eyes glowed, then dimmed. "I'm sorry," the dragon replied. "That request exceeds my power." Ethan frowned. "Why not? You can transport people across space." "There's a catch," Shenron explained. "The target must consent to being summoned. Broly's current strength surpasses Son Goku's even after his victory over Frieza. If he refuses, I cannot force him." Silence stretched between them as Ethan absorbed the news. He'd hoped to cut straight to the chase, no more chasing leads across half the galaxy. But without Broly's approval, teleportation was impossible. "Very well," Ethan said at last. "We'll have to find him the old-fashioned way." Shenron's great head dipped once, then the stars winked back on, and the dragon faded into glowing motes that drifted to the lips of the 7 Dragon Balls. The stones scattered across the ground, lifeless until called again. Ethan crouched to gather them. He didn't relish trekking across a hostile planet in search of one of the universe's most ferocious warriors, but he had planned for this. His ship was stocked, his gear assembled, and he wasn't about to turn back now. Sliding the final Dragon Ball into his satchel, Ethan straightened up. Ahead lay unknown dangers, and a fateful confrontation that could tip the balance of power. With resolve hardening in his chest, he strode toward the horizon, ready to face whatever lay in wait. "Then send me to the legendary Super Saiyan Broly." Ethan's voice rang out, a mixture of determination and apprehension. Deep down, he worried Shenlong might simply snatch anyone named Broly at random. "Your wish is simple and has been granted," the Eternal Dragon intoned. No sooner had Shenlong spoken than Ethan was seized by a tremendous force pulling him from every direction. It felt like raw energy tearing at reality itself, whisking him through rifts in space at impossible speed. The world around him blurred, time flattened into an endless stream. His heart raced with equal parts astonishment and excitement. What kind of place would he find on the other side? In truth, the force wasn't beyond his power to break. If he'd wanted, Ethan could have shattered it with a surge of his own strength. But he didn't. Instead, he chose to trust Shenlong's promise, confident the dragon would deliver him exactly where he needed to go. Just as he began to wonder how long this passage would last, the invisible pull suddenly released. Gravity reclaimed him all at once, and Ethan found himself plummeting through open air. Chapter X, Broly's Domain. Ethan tore through the turbulent skies, the friction igniting a crimson glow across his skin. In an instant, he steadied himself in midair and peered down at the planet below. This place, is it Broly's world? He activated his heightened senses, supercharged key perception, enhanced vision, and hyperacute hearing. Almost immediately, a colossal, violent key signature slammed into him, dwarfing any energy he'd ever encountered, including his own. Without hesitation, he he launched himself toward that overwhelming power. Across the barren landscape, he spotted a lone child dragging a massive corpse. It was Broly, but not the Broly of legend. This new Inca, our nation had grown far more fearsome. Whereas the original Broly merely doubled his strength each year, this version's power multiplied exponentially in the heat of battle. Given more time, he might even rival, and perhaps conquer, Super Saiyan Blue Gogeta. Ethan materialized beside the boy like a specter. His supersonic approach was contained within his personal biofield, so the surrounding wind and terrain remained undisturbed. No sound, no shockwave. He flickered in and out of sight, utterly ghost-like. Before Broly could register his presence, a sharp agony flared along his tail, as though gripped by an invisible vice. The boy jerked to a halt, eyes wide in shock. Ethan hovered, his gaze fixed on the stunned child. The real confrontation was about to begin. Ethan's heart pounded as he circled Broly, worried that brute force alone wouldn't pierce the Saiyan's extraordinary defense. So instead, he concentrated his heat vision on the one known weak spot, the tail. In a blink, he lashed out, severing Broly's tail and yanking it free. A spray of blood spurted across the battlefield, more than enough for the sample he needed. "Ah! Who's there?" Broly roared, whipping around in fury. He saw no opponent, only open air where his tail had been. The sting in his backside confirmed it wasn't his imagination. With a deafening battle cry, he unleashed a relentless barrage of ki blasts, determined to annihilate the invisible threat. But Ethan was already gone. With a final sprint, he vaulted clear of the chaos and dove underground, channeling his ki to hollow out a vast cavern beneath the surface. Once inside, he sealed the entrance with an energy shield. Safe in his subterranean refuge, he set down a handful of universal capsules. Each one contained essential supplies, food rations, medical kits, spare equipment, and most critically, Ethan's mobile laboratory. He pressed a button on his wrist console, and the lab's instruments floated into position around him. A tray glowed to life, carrying the freshly severed tail segment. Carefully, Ethan drew blood into sterile vials, recording every data point. As the electronic readouts danced across his holographic display, a small, satisfied smile tugged at his lips. "All right," he murmured, settling into his work. "Let's get started." Ethan had no intention of returning to Earth or facing Broly again until he'd unlocked the secrets hidden in this Saiyan blood. And with his lab finally in place, there was nothing to stop him. Ethan cleared his lab bench and dove headlong into his most ambitious project yet, dissecting Broly's blood, isolating his cells, and decoding the mysterious gene embedded in that Saiyan tail. Day after day, the laboratory's reinforced walls trembled with Broly's furious roars, each outburst signaling a surge in his uncontrollable rage. But Ethan didn't need rest. He'd bioengineered himself to function around the clock. So while Broly remained locked in stasis, Ethan could switch gears whenever one avenue of research ran dry. Whenever his work on Broly yielded no breakthroughs, he turned his attention to the Doomsday gene he'd harvested from Kryptonian tissue samples. His plan was twofold. First, crack the genetic code that fueled Broly's legendary power. Second, splice it with the Kryptonian trait that allowed Doomsday to regenerate and evolve after every defeat. By blending Saiyan ferocity with Kryptonian resilience, Ethan aimed to create an unstoppable hybrid warrior, one he could control. For 2 relentless years, the only markers of time were the metronomic ticks of the wall-mounted timer and the growing pile of discarded vials. Then, at last, the moment of triumph arrived. Under the lab's harsh white lights, Ethan extracted a glowing strand of DNA that shimmered with untold potential. He held it up in his gloved hand, heart pounding. He had done it. In that simple helix lay the promise of a new apex life form, born of rage, hardened by Kryptonian might, and ready to reshape the balance of power. Chapter 17. Doomsday? Broly? Doomsday's DNA, Broly's DNA. Ethan stared at the 2 test tubes on the metal tray before him. In the first vial, an inky liquid was steadily shifting to a rich, polished crimson, as though it were alive. In the second, a fiery red solution bubbled and roiled as if it were boiling. He knew exactly what each sample represented. The first contained the genome of Doomsday, the catastrophic product of Kryptonian science gone horribly awry. After countless failed experiments, the mutated cells had finally broken free of every restraint, giving birth to the monster spoken of in hushed tones across the galaxy. Doomsday possessed hide-shredding strength, the ability to leap faster and farther than any known flight, and inexhaustible stamina. His healing factor was so advanced that wounds healed almost before they formed. Even more terrifying, in combat he evolved on the fly, adapting new defenses to counter whatever tactics his opponent used. No two defeats were ever the same. You couldn't beat Doomsday twice with the same trick. A single manufacturing glitch had robbed him of any sense of ally or enemy, turning him into an indiscriminate engine of destruction. Beside that lay the second vial, the pulsing heart of a different legend. Broly, the fabled Saiyan whose raw, untamed power dwarfed that of ordinary superhumans. Broly's DNA promised potential that no Kryptonian or Terran scientist had ever witnessed, a power that surged uncontrollably, like a star on the brink of supernova. Ethan took a steadying breath. In his hands were the blueprints for two of the universe's most unstoppable forces. Every moral alarm in his head screamed that he should destroy these samples at once. But the same blood-drenched reputation that made them the ultimate weapon also made them irresistible. If he could find a way to merge these genomes or control them, he might finally tip the balance in the endless cycle of cosmic conflict. Setting his jaw, he reached for the injector. The fate of countless worlds would be decided in the next few moments, and he was the only one with the power to pull the trigger. Ethan stared at the two glowing test tubes on the lab bench, his heart pounding in his chest. He still didn't know which version of Krypton his cells truly came from, and that uncertainty meant he could only guess at what kind of doomsday might emerge. He thanked his lucky stars that he'd only used a fraction of his cellular samples in this experiment. If he'd gone all in, he might already be dead. Each test tube held a wildly different possibility. In one, the vicious doomsday gene sat primed for activation. In the other, the raw Saiyan power of Broly, legendary Super Saiyan, waited to combine with Ethan's Kryptonian DNA. But every attempt to fuse the two had ended in disaster. The genes simply attacked each other, tearing the developing cells apart. Tens of thousands of trials, and he'd exhausted every resource he'd prepared. There was no bringing them together safely. That left him with a stark choice. Option 1. Merge with the Doomsday gene and become a Doomsday Kryptonian. The success rate hovered at a perilous 50-50. If the fusion failed, he'd transform into Doomsday itself, a mindless monster driven only by savage instinct. Technically, he'd still be alive, but lost to any sense of self. Option 2. Take on the Broly gene and become the first ever Kryptonian Saiyan hybrid in the entire multiverse. The odds were better here, over 70% chance of success. And if it worked, he'd inherit the legendary strength of a Super Saiyan along with his own Kryptonian abilities. Ethan took a steadying breath, recalling how far he'd come. From the moment he discovered his unique heritage, he'd faced one impossible challenge after another. This was by far the greatest gamble yet, one path leading to uncontrollable monstrosity, the other to a potential superpowered evolution beyond anything the cosmos had ever seen. He reached out and picked up the vial containing the Broly gene. Warm light pulsed within it as if echoing his own racing pulse. Across the table, the Doomsday sample glowed an ominous red, a silent reminder of everything he stood to lose. Ethan sealed his jaw, tapped the vial against his palm, and whispered to himself, "For humanity, and for Krypton, I choose the Saiyan." He drew in a deep breath, preparing to inject the fusion serum. His future would be forged in the fire of that decision, either as the universe's fiercest warrior or a monster that devoured existence itself. He pressed down on the syringe, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. Ethan stood alone in the dimly lit lab, the two vials before him shimmering in the harsh fluorescent glow. One contained the essence of the legendary Super Saiyan, power beyond imagining, but uncertain when he could unlock it. The other held Doomsday's gene, a raw, unstoppable force. Even after weeks of debate, 4 long weeks of pacing, researching, and sleepless nights, he still hadn't decided. But time was running out. If he waited any longer, his enemies might strike. With a determined breath, Ethan reached for the Doomsday vial. No other Kryptonian had ever survived that mutagen, but he refused to remain ordinary. He would become something more, something unstoppable. He uncorked the test tube and brought it to his lips. His hardened, steel-like biology fought back instantly. The tiny injection needle buckled under his defenses, its earth alloy frame twisting and snapping. Ethan's jaw set. There was only one way. He braced himself and unleashed a burst of supersonic acceleration, teeth clamping the broken shaft. With a sharp crack, the alloy splintered, and the needle tip pierced his soft palate. A searing white heat exploded through Ethan's veins. He staggered, nearly colliding with the stainless steel table, as agony ripped from his core to his fingertips. His vision tunneled, every nerve screaming, yet he forced himself to stay upright. The doomsday gene was already rewriting him, transforming every cell, every fiber of muscle and bone. And in that crucible of pain, Ethan felt the first tremors of a power that would change him forever. Ethan's cells shuddered as the doomsday gene swept through them. Because the new cells had been cloned from his own tissue, they fused seamlessly without setting off a violent immune response. Then he felt it, a raw, limitless power pouring from the tears in his flesh. Those same wounds regenerated almost instantly as Doomsday's cells not only healed but came back stronger, now impervious to the forces that had once torn them apart. Dark, hardened biomass began to creep across Ethan's skin, signaling the birth of a primal, monstrous form, but Ethan remained perfectly composed. He reached out with his superbrain, the razor-sharp component of his mind that executes the most delicate and precise tasks. Simultaneously, he erected his biological force field, a universal energy matrix capable of rewriting reality itself and bending the laws of physics. It's the same field that lets Kryptonians pull entire planets through space as if they were toys. With surgical precision, his superbrain focused on the sun cells embedded deep in his flesh, dismantling their energy matrix molecule by molecule. If ever the mutation threatened to break his control, Ethan had one final failsafe ready: the travel crush. With a thought, he could compress himself so completely that no trace of the abomination would survive. Calm and resolute, Ethan held the doomsday gene in check, an unstoppable force mastered by an unbreakable will. After the enhanced neural interface and the biological force field activated, Doomsday's cells behaved. Rather than running wild, they fused seamlessly into Ethan's system. As they assimilated, layers of decaying tissue peeled away, Ethan's old cells, consumed and metabolized by the alien cells until nothing remained. When Ethan finally stood, his body had been utterly transformed. His muscles were like tempered steel, and he now towered well over 1.9 meters. Yet he wasn't bloated or grotesquely bulky. Instead, his frame as sleek and powerful, his shoulders so broad that no one could wrap their arms around him to touch his back. Chapter 18. Return, destroy the Kryptonians. Ethan roared, his voice echoing across the barren landscape. A searing surge of energy coursed through his veins, an unending current of power that left him trembling with anticipation. He flexed his fists, eager to test the limits of this newfound strength. How much of Doomsday's terrifying power could he command now? Ethan reflected on the monster's greatest asset, its hyper-adaptive evolution. No matter the assault, even Darkseid's Omega beams, famed for eradicating entire worlds, Doomsday could be slain and, moments later, rise again, fully healed and immune to the same attack. And that was only a fraction of its true might. A perfected Doomsday could unleash spores to consume every living organism nearby and regenerate itself from those very remains. Even Superman could hold the line for only 10 minutes before succumbing, only to re-emerge as Doomsday Superman. Ethan's mind flashed to Broly, the legendary warrior whose raw power dwarfed most foes. He could hardly think of a better trial by fire, yet the thought of facing Broly gave him pause. Broly's strength was the stuff of myth, and these Kryptonian warriors weren't the real embodiment of Doomsday's fury. Ethan wasn't ready to risk everything on a reckless gambit. He took a steadying breath and let the energy within him settle, feeling it pulse with potential. Soon enough, he would find the perfect battlefield to unleash his full might and prove once and for all that no one stood a chance against the power he now wielded. Ethan steadied himself. With Doomsday's bioengineered force field and his Kryptonian powers, the creature would be all but invulnerable. He drew a deep breath and activated the time travel device, pressing the universal capsule to his chest where it nestled against his heart. This time, the temporal tunnel felt far wider. no longer just a sliver that threatened to shred him, but broad enough to admit an arm. Still, he emerged on the other side, feeling as though he'd been stretched like taffy. He found himself back in the Marvel Universe, but he didn't bathe in solar energy. Instead, Doomsday's torn cells knitted themselves together at superhuman speed. A raw, titanic force erupted within him, so powerful that Ethan staggered under its intensity as it thundered through his veins. "He's stronger than before, several times over," Ethan muttered, testing the new limits of that power. His regeneration rivals Wolverine's, maybe even outpaces it. Best of all, this evolution didn't hinge on sunlight. Kryptonians need the yellow sun to approach immortality. Doomsday does it on his own. Combine those strengths, and with enough solar charge, I might just stand toe-to-toe with even an incomplete Doomsday. But does the portal's size change too? And if so, why? Ethan paused to consider the question, tapping into his superbrain to verify exactly when he'd left the Marvel Universe. Though it felt like an eternity, only a single second had elapsed here. He exhaled in relief. If hours or days had passed, the Emperor Company might have collapsed entirely, or even been seized by the Magpie's nest. Granted, with Compound Number 1 already out of contention, Ethan's chief rival was neutralized, but he preferred not to leave things to chance. Once inside the grand foyer of the Imperial building, he began weighing possible explanations for the portal's fluctuating dimensions. First, perhaps the width of the gateway corresponds directly to the traveler's available energy. His own power had soared during that recent excursion to the Dragon Ball world, and every interdimensional jump drained a portion of his reserves. The more energy he stored up for the crossing, the larger the opening might become. A second theory formed almost as quickly. The portal could be adapting itself to the nature of the destination realm. Different universes might impose their own size requirements on the doorway, much like a vessel adjusting its hull to suit varying ocean depths. Ethan paused, gazing at the faint shimmer still lingering in the air where the portal had closed. Neither explanation felt entirely satisfactory yet. He would need to run controlled tests, varying his own energy levels, visiting multiple worlds, and charting each result before he could draw a firm conclusion. But for now, one thing was certain. Every journey expanded not only his horizons, but also the mysteries he had yet to unravel. Each dimension he crosses dictates the size and sometimes the shape of the portal he must pass through. Its true limits remain a mystery. Ethan's next move is to attempt a return to the Dragon Ball universe to see if the Dragon Balls can ferry him back to that world's Earth. If that fails, he'll redirect his focus to the Marvel cosmos, board his starship, and chart a course for yet another version of Earth. He doesn't know how far the Dragon Balls can reach or how long the voyage might take, but one thing is certain, he must make it back. Otherwise, everything he's done would be for naught. And while he's at it, he plans to explore new realities, amassing as many variables as he can. What drives Ethan above all else is strength. He has no taste for a comfortable, unchallenged life. He's already slipped through time, defied fate, and inherited the awesome powers of a Kryptonian. To settle for anything less than ultimate power, without pursuing the greatest challenge, the perfect partner, or the highest heights of pleasure, would render all his temporal journeys meaningless. The Imperial Company was founded on precisely this ambition, yet until now, Ethan never allowed himself to pause and enjoy it. Standing here, as a Kryptonian on the day of destruction, he finally grants himself that moment of respite, and steels himself for whatever comes next. Ethan surveyed the small pile of sleek capsules at his feet and let out a breathless laugh. "Success!" he murmured, picking them up one by one. These weren't ordinary capsules. They were his own advanced design, identical in size and shape to the Dragon Ball world's universal capsules, but far more powerful. He'd intended only to test the interdimensional gateway with one or two prototypes. To his astonishment, the portal had expanded just enough for him to bring the entire batch along. Carefully, Ethan activated the biological force field he'd engineered specifically for this mission, enclosing the capsules in an invisible bubble of protective energy. He knew that he couldn't rely on Dragon Ball realm materials here in the Marvel Universe, but that wasn't the real hurdle. The true breakthrough lay in his microparticle rearrangement technology. the patented black box at the heart of every universal capsule. Without that capability to manipulate matter on an atomic level, the capsules would be no more remarkable than empty shells. Now that they were safely secured, Ethan was eager to begin his next challenge, reverse engineering enough local resources to reproduce his design and perhaps revolutionize this new world. Chapter 19, Imperial Philanthropy. Ethan leaned back and watched the newly forged omnipotent capsule hover before him, its contours shifting with a quiet hum of power. "It actually worked," he murmured. "Maybe the Marvel Universe can handle more advanced tech." Creating the omnipotent capsule here had gone far smoother than back on his homeworld. He'd suspected as much. The Marvel Universe overflowed with black technology, so its capacity to integrate even absurdly futuristic devices was far greater. In comparison, his capsule felt almost pedestrian next to the likes of PIM particles. Yet to Ethan, it was a triumph. This breakthrough gave him an even bolder idea. If he could return to the Dragon Ball world, he'd have direct access to artificial human technology, something he'd only glimpsed in theory before. Even a single prototype of the infinite energy furnace would revolutionize everything. Its energy output dwarfed that of a first-stage Super Saiyan, and rumor held that a more advanced model could unleash enough power to level a solar system in seconds. He grinned at the possibilities. He might not have had the credentials or the courage to pursue such catastrophic tech when he visited Dr. Brief on his original journey. But armed with this success in the Marvel realm, nothing would stop him from seizing every advantage once he got back. The real game was just beginning. Ethan leaned back from the lab bench and surveyed his whiteboard, cluttered with chemical formulas and hastily sketched reaction pathways. The concepts he'd outlined so far were promising, but there was still a long road ahead. His next targets were super divine water and the fabled fairy beans. To his astonishment, even veterans like Sun Wukong and his circle had never seriously pursued large-scale cultivation of fairy beans, nor had they tried to extract, purify, or synthesize their active compounds. It was a staggering waste of nature's bounty. Ethan knew that if he could crack the code, if he could purify or even replicate these substances in the lab, the payoff would be extraordinary. Fairy beans were coveted by cosmic-level cultivators for their miraculous restorative and enhancement properties, and super divine water, well, it might just hold the key to his own second breakthrough. Just then, the lab's door creaked open. Michelle stepped inside, her face half hidden by a surgical mask, a tray of disinfectant wipes in hand. "Boss," she greeted softly, nodding toward the spotless benches and gleaming instruments. "Everything's been sterilized. I ran a full cycle on the autoclave." She glanced at the notes scrawled across Ethan's whiteboard. Compound number 1 should already be enough to generate a steady income. There's a huge market for performance enhancers. People will always chase the dream of transcending human limits. Her eyes flicked back to Ethan, waiting for his next instruction. He simply tapped the board, a hint of a smile forming. The real work was about to begin. There's one question above all others stirring fierce debate. Should anyone who's been injected with compound number 1 be allowed to compete in sports? To most reasonable people, the answer is an emphatic no. After all, the drug literally doubles your physical capacity, and the more athletic you are to begin with, the more dramatic the boost. Imagine giving any heavyweight boxing champion this serum. He'd steamroll past Ali and Tyson at their peaks without so much as breaking a sweat. Still, a vocal minority insists that if the goal of competition is to find the best athlete, then enhanced or not, everyone ought to be invited to the starting line. They're human beings too, after all. And then there are the cynics, those who pretend to champion this fairness debate simply to fan the flames and profit from the chaos it creates. They even raise the existential question, does someone who's taken compound number 1 remain truly human? Ethan, with his supercomputer sharp mind, has already run the numbers. In a world where the strong keep getting stronger, the naturally ordinary and the weak won't just lose medals, they'll be rendered obsolete. No society could endure that. Faced with extinction, the unaltered majority would never bow quietly. Instead, they'd carve out a fight of their own, a do-or-die contest they control. And that, Ethan realizes, could tear humanity apart even faster than the drug itself. By then, society was teetering on the brink of seismic change. Ordinary people, those who couldn't compete in this new world of engineered advantage, feared for their futures. Even without any physical differences, human history had long been scarred by distinctions of race, lineage, and class. Now that some individuals could actually look and perform better, the divide threatened to tear civilization apart. Protests and sit-ins sprang up everywhere. Thousands camped outside the gates of Emperor Corporation, demanding that Compound Na, the miracle gene-editing serum, be made freely available to all. "It's your duty," they chanted. "Help us all become new humans." Ethan watched the demonstrations with a detached curiosity. He believed there was a simpler way to defuse the crisis, while also profiting handsomely. After all, people already took out car loans and mortgages. Why shouldn't there be an enhancement loan? Under his plan, Emperor Corporation would offer financing for Compound No. 1. Applicants could spread the cost over years, just like any other major purchase. Wealthy buyers would remain the primary customers, of course, but as the market neared saturation, subsidized loans could bring in less affluent clients. By the time demand plateaued, the company would have extended itself into an entirely new and hugely lucrative financial sector. Ethan outlined his proposal to the board in simple terms. Let the poor in on the miracle, too, and let them pay it back in installments. Those who couldn't afford the upfront price of genetic perfection would still line up for the chance to upgrade their DNA, and Emperor Corporation would recoup its investment over time, with interest. It was philanthropy wrapped in capitalism, a win-win solution that, in Ethan's view, would ultimately stabilize society while filling the company's coffers. In a world on the verge of fracturing along biological fault lines, his new human gene-editing loan was the perfect remedy. Ethan sat back in his chair, eyes alight with the promise of what was to come. It was only a matter of time before Compound No. 1 could be mass-produced and its price dramatically reduced. The world's elite were already saturated. Every power player had received their one dose, and a second injection offered no additional benefit. That ceiling meant a new market had to be created. He envisioned a model much like Apple's. Remember how frenzied fans sold kidneys just to buy the iPhone 4? Today, that once-coveted device was worth almost nothing. Yet the craze for early adoption remained alive and well in America. Why not harness it? By offering body enhancement procedures on an installment plan, through the Imperial Company's new Body Enhancement Loan Program, customers would enjoy a 20% discount. In Ethan's mind, this wasn't pure commerce. It was charity. Think of the lives he could change. Enhanced humans would be humanity's first line of defense when the Chitauri finally returned. The potential impact felt boundless, worth all the effort, and then some. He knew that, in the Marvel Universe, merit rarely factored into anyone's success, but that only steeled his resolve. Ethan wasn't just building a business, he was forging the next generation of heroes, and if he could make them accessible to everyone, with a little help from friendly financing, so much the better. After all, Ethan had rescued so many people in that prehistoric city, and again during the journey to the West. Surely he would have been honored with the radiant golden light of merit? Chapter 20. Press Conference. The auditorium lights dimmed as the Emperor Company's logo blazed across the giant screen behind the podium. Reporters from every continent leaned forward in anticipation. At last, a sharply tailored spokesman strode into view. Ethan, the mastermind behind the company's latest initiative. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ethan began, his voice calm but firm, "today we introduce the Human Enhancement Loan, the most powerful financial instrument ever offered to ordinary citizens." He paused, scanning the rows of curious faces. "You might ask, if we've cut interest rates by 20%, why would anyone take on more debt? Simple. In true capitalist fashion, our goal isn't merely to recoup the principal, but to multiply it several times over through interest. That is the essence of profit." Ethan clicked a remote, and pie charts illustrating projected returns filled the screen. To ensure our plan's success, we acquired our own banking arm. Once an individual enrolls in this program, they become and remain our clients for life. Middle managers, entry-level workers, even high-ranking professionals, they'll all owe their futures to Emperor Company. That loyalty is priceless. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A reporter stood, voice wavering. What if someone defaults or flees overseas? Ethan's eyes glinted. They've underestimated our security network. The mercenaries we've contracted operate worldwide, and they're not volunteers. Should you attempt to abscond to the remotest corner of Africa, rest assured we'll bring you back. Non-payment isn't an option. In fact, he added with a chilling smile, your body itself becomes collateral. Enhanced organs, especially biokinetic kidneys, fetch tens of millions on the black market. At that point, every one of your cells is more valuable to us alive or disassembled. Cameras flashed as Ethan stepped away from the podium. The press conference ended in stunned silence, but one thing was clear. No one would underestimate Emperor Company again. Ethan sensed her arrival before he saw her. Even with his super hearing and enhanced vision turned off, his chi sense warned him someone was stepping into the room. "What's up, Michelle?" he asked, not bothering to look up from the tangle of paperwork and vials spread across his desk. "Don't let me remind you again," Michelle replied, placing a manila folder in front of him. "Tomorrow's the press conference." Ethan rubbed his temples. Right. How could I forget?" His mind was already racing ahead to the experiments on super divine water, those magic beans, and a dozen other research projects clamoring for his attention. A simple corporate event felt almost beneath him. But this was no ordinary meeting. It marked Emperor Company's very first public appearance since its founding. At that conference, they would unveil the company's development roadmap, reveal key projects, and most important, announce Emperor Bank's new human enhancement loan program. In effect, they were about to open the floodgates for people willing to go into debt for a shot at superhuman abilities. And they had a surprise ready for their competitors, the idealistic labs offering free human enhancement treatments to the masses. Ethan leaned back as Michelle glanced over his shoulder. "Introducing our trial version of the superhuman serum," he said, voice low. $10,000 a pill, one injection, and in an hour you're operating at twice normal capacity. "That price point will silence a lot of critics," Michelle observed. Ethan smirked. "Or bankrupt a lot of thrill seekers. Either way, we control the market." He tapped the folder. "Go over the final talking points with me, and let's make sure this press conference sets the tone for every investor and reporter in the room." Michelle nodded and opened the folder. Ethan stood, stretching. Tomorrow, he reminded himself, every eye in the city would be on Emperor Company, and on him. And that made missing a detail or two suddenly feel a lot more dangerous. In Ethan's estimation, the market potential and the profits of this new drug far outstrip those of compound number 1. After all, not everyone can afford a $10 million dose, but at $10,000 a shot, countless buyers would scrimp and save just for a taste. Once someone experiences superhuman strength, the addiction sets in almost instantly. Then Ethan's only remaining worry would be whether the production lines at Emperor Corporation's newly acquired factories could keep pace with demand. Of course, widespread misuse is all but guaranteed, and it's hard to imagine major powers like the United States passing up superhuman enhancement. $10,000 buys you an hour of near invincibility. $10 million fields 1,000 enhanced soldiers. In a war scenario, governments no longer need to fret about recouping their investment. After all, retired veterans don't write reimbursement checks. The emergence of this superhuman serum neatly solves that problem. The following morning, Ethan strode into Emperor Corporation's headquarters to address the world's press. Ethan stepped onto the stage of the Emperor Tower's grand auditorium, where a hushed anticipation filled the air. Flashes popped in rapid succession as the world's press, carefully whittled down to the 100 most influential outlets, trained their lenses on him. Beyond these walls, dozens more journalists waited in vain for scraps of information. After months of tantalizing secrecy, Emperor Company had vaulted into the top 10 of global industries, its revolutionary products and reclusive founder the talk of every newsroom. Now at last, its leader would speak. Ethan paused to let the moment settle. Then, his voice calm and confident, he began. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. I'm Ethan, founder, CEO, and lead researcher at Emperor Company." His simple introduction sent another wave of flashes through the hall. With a courteous nod, he stepped to one side. "Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our Executive Vice President, Ms. Michelle J. Thompson. As Michelle took the podium, the world leaned in, eager to learn what Emperor Company would reveal next. "Mr. Reynolds," called a reporter in the front row. Ethan paused, lifted his chin, and pointed. "Dina Harper from Tech Today. Go ahead." Dina's hand shot up. Before she could speak, Ethan swept an arm toward the woman standing at his side. "This is Michelle Ward, our executive vice president and my secretary. Please help us keep things orderly." Michelle offered a courteous nod and stepped forward, gently reminding the crowd to respect the live broadcast. The flashbulbs clicked incessantly as reporters jostled for position. Once the room quieted, Ethan leaned into the microphone. "Who has the first question?" A young journalist raised her voice. "Mr. Reynolds, what are Emperor Company's future plans? And when can we expect your next major breakthrough?" Ethan considered for a moment, then replied, "Let me start with some exciting news from Emperor Bank, our financial arm. We're launching a human enhancement loan program to help qualified candidates access superhuman medicines. It's an entirely new approach, combining medical innovation with flexible financing." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Reporters exchanged surprised glances, scribbling furiously. No one had expected Emperor Company to unveil a loans division alongside its cutting-edge biotech research. Ethan smiled. "We believe this integrated strategy, melding technology, medicine, and finance, will redefine personal enhancement. I'll take a few more questions."